Nobody showed up to my graduation. 5 empty seats stared back at me in a crowded auditorium. 3 days later, my mother texted me demanding $2,500 for my sister's Sweet 18. I sent her $1 with a note that said, "Congrats." Then I changed the locks on my house. Now the police are in my driveway and my family is about to learn exactly what happens when you mistake a black woman's silence for weakness. The harsh strobe of red and blue police lights washed over the pristine brick facade of my 4-bedroom home in Atlanta. It is amazing how quickly a quiet suburban evening can shatter when entitlement meets a hard boundary. I stood on my wide front porch, the rough grain of my favorite ceramic mug warm against my palms. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my dark roast coffee, watching the absolute chaos unfold on my manicured lawn. My mother Valerie was putting on the performance of a lifetime. Her arms waved frantically in the humid Georgia air as she screamed at the 2 bewildered police officers who had just pulled up to my curb. She pointed a trembling manicured finger at me, her voice hitting that shrill theatrical pitch she always used when she wanted an audience to side with her. She told the officers that I was a squatter. She actually looked a uniformed police officer in the eye and claimed that I had maliciously hijacked the venue she booked for her youngest daughter's milestone birthday party. She cried real tears talking about how much money they had spent, how the caterers were arriving any minute, and how this dangerous woman on the porch was ruining a miner's special day. I watched her weep for a party, and I felt absolutely nothing. The tears she cried for a catering deposit were tears she could not spare for me just 3 days prior. My grip tightened slightly on my coffee mug as the memory surfaced sharp and clear. 3 days ago, I was not a squatter or a villain. I was a woman walking across a university stage to receive my Master of Science in Taxation. I had spent 4 grueling years working 50-hour weeks at my corporate accounting firm, only to drive straight to evening classes, subsisting on vending machine coffee and sheer willpower. When the dean called my name, I stepped into the bright stage lights and looked out into the cavernous auditorium. It was a sea of joy. Black families holding massive bouquets of flowers, shouting names, holding up signs. I looked toward the center section 5th row. The seats I had fought to reserve. The seats I had driven across town to deliver tickets for. 5 empty chairs. Not a single person from my bloodline showed up. There was no cheering section. There was no bouquet. When I walked back to my car, I checked my phone hoping for at least a text message claiming they were stuck in traffic or had a flat tire. There was nothing, just the blank glowing screen of my phone mocking my lifelong desperation for their approval. They completely ghosted my graduation. The sharp crackle of the police radio snapped me back to the reality of my front yard. The officers were trying to calm my mother down, asking for some form of documentation to prove she had rented this property. That is when my sister-in-law Ashley decided it was her time to shine. Ashley is a white woman who married my older brother Jamal, and she operates with a breathtaking level of unearned audacity. She truly believes that being married to a black man gives her a free pass to dictate how our family operates. She stepped right in front of my mother, crossing her arms and using her best authoritative voice on the cops. She confidently declared that she had digital proof they had every right to be on this property and that the police needed to arrest me immediately for criminal trespass and ruining a family event. The officers looked at me, waiting for my defense, expecting a screaming match. I did not give them one. I do not argue with delusion. I simply set my coffee mug down on the porch railing. I picked up the thick manila folder I had been holding under my arm. I walked slowly down the porch steps, the gravel crunching under my house slippers. I handed the lead officer my Georgia State driver license. Then I handed him the official property deed bearing my name in bold black ink as the sole owner of this estate. Finally, I handed him a freshly stamped restraining order against the very people standing on my lawn. I watched the officer read the documents. I watched his posture shift from cautious mediation to stern authority. He looked at Ashley and told her that if she did not step back, she would be aiding in trespassing. The smug satisfaction drained from Ashley's face so fast it was almost comical. My mother's fake tears stopped instantly, replaced by a look of sheer terror as the officer placed a hand on his radio and ordered them to vacate my property immediately. How did we get from 5 empty seats in a graduation auditorium to a police standoff in my driveway? It started with a notification chime. 3 days after they ghosted the biggest professional milestone of my life, I was sitting in my home office. My degree was still sitting in its stiff cardboard mailer on my desk. I had not even bothered to buy a frame for it yet. The silence from my family had been absolute. No missed calls, no voicemails, no texts. I was actively working through the stages of grief, mourning the family I wished I had while accepting the family I actually got. Then my phone lit up. It was a text message from Valerie. For a split second, that naive inner child in me thought it might be an apology. Maybe they had the dates wrong. Maybe there was a massive emergency that prevented them from coming or calling. I unlocked the screen and read the words that finally killed the last shred of hope I held for my mother. The text read, "Need $2,500 for Keisha's Sweet 18, send it by Friday so we can finalize the caterer." I stared at the glowing pixels, reading the sentence over and over again until the words lost their meaning. There was no greeting. There was no apology. There was no "Congratulations on your master's degree, Jasmine, we are so proud of you." There was absolutely nothing but a cold transactional demand for my hard-earned money to fund a party for the golden child. My younger sister Keisha was the miracle baby born late in my parents' lives, and they treated her like royalty while treating me like an automated teller machine. I was the invisible middle child whose only value lay in my corporate salary and my ability to fund their lifestyle. They skipped my graduation to go shopping for a dress, and now they had the nerve to demand I pay for the food they would eat while celebrating without me. In the past, I would have drafted a long emotional paragraph. I would have explained how deeply they hurt me, how exhausted I was, how unfair it all felt. I would have begged them to see my pain. But that day, the tears simply dried up. The grief solidified into a block of ice in my chest. I realized that explaining your pain to people who benefit from your silence is a waste of breath. They do not care about my feelings, they only care about my wallet. I did not type a single word in reply. I opened my cash application. I typed in my mother's username. I entered the amount of $1.00. In the memo line, I typed a single word. "Congrats." I hit send. I am Jasmine, 35 years old and a corporate certified public accountant. If you have ever had to cut off a toxic bloodline to protect your peace, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop your city in the comments. Let me tell you how I let my family orchestrate their own downfall, and how a single dollar bill was the match that burned their entire facade to the ground. The notification bell on my phone chimed again and again. The family group chat was having a synchronized meltdown over my $1 contribution to the Keisha Fund. I did not bother looking at the screen. I knew exactly what Valerie was typing in all caps. I knew Jerome was probably dictating audio messages about respect and familial duty. I just took another sip of my coffee and let the phone buzz itself off the edge of my desk. To understand the sheer audacity of a $2,500 demand via text message, you have to understand the deeply rooted hierarchy of my family. We operated on a caste system disguised as a family tree. At the very top sat Keisha. She was the miracle baby born when my mother was 42 and my father was 45. From the moment she took her first breath in that delivery room, Valerie and Jerome treated her less like a daughter and more like a deity. Keisha did not have a childhood. She had an 18-year coronation. When I was her age, I was working weekend shifts at a local grocery store just to afford my own prom dress and paying for my own college applications. I wore hand-me-downs from older cousins and learned early that asking for money meant receiving a 30-minute lecture on the value of a dollar and the struggles of our ancestors. Keisha lived a completely different reality. She drove a brand new sedan to high school while I was still taking the city bus to my first corporate internship. If Keisha brought home a barely passing grade on a report card, my parents threw a dinner party to celebrate her hard work and claimed the teachers were simply intimidated by a confident young black woman. When I brought home straight honors throughout my entire undergraduate program, Jerome barely looked up from the television and Valerie simply nodded as if checking off a basic maintenance requirement. I was the middle child. I was the invisible load-bearing wall of the house. I was expected to hold everything up, never requiring maintenance, never asking for praise, and certainly never cracking under the pressure. They conditioned me to be self-sufficient, and then they bitterly resented me for actually achieving it. I am a corporate certified public accountant. I specialize in complex tax structures and corporate mergers. My brain operates in spreadsheets, forecasting, and risk management. It is a demanding, high-stakes environment, and I am exceptionally good at it. My compensation reflects that reality. I pull a significant six-figure salary. 3 years ago, I closed on a stunning 4-bedroom home in a heavily guarded, gated community in the northern suburbs of Atlanta. I have quartz countertops, a soaking tub I could swim in, and a security system that alerts me if a stray leaf blows across my driveway. I built a life of absolute peace and financial stability. You would think having a daughter who pulled herself up to the top tier of the corporate financial world would be a point of massive pride. You would think my parents would celebrate the fact that one of their children broke the generational curse of living paycheck to paycheck. Instead, they weaponized it against me. To Valerie and Jerome, my career is not a legitimate achievement. To my face, they dismiss my profession with casual, aggressive cruelty. Valerie loves to tell her church friends that I just crunch numbers for white folks all day. Jerome likes to remind me that real wealth is built through entrepreneurship, completely ignoring the fact that his own business ventures usually end with him dodging collection calls. They treat my corporate success as a betrayal of my roots, as if my refusal to struggle is somehow an insult to their own financial instability. Yet that very same corporate salary they mock is the exact well they try to drink from every single month. I became their personal automated teller machine the moment I cleared my first $60,000 a year. It started small. A $50 request here to cover a light bill. $100 there because Valerie saw a matching hat and shoe set she absolutely needed for a church event. Because I craved their validation, I paid it. I thought my generosity would buy me a seat at the table. I thought if I solved their problems, they would finally look at me the way they looked at Keisha. But the demands only escalated as my salary grew. The requests transformed into expectations. The expectations morphed into outright entitlement. 2 years ago, Jerome needed $4,000 to fix the transmission on his truck. He did not ask me if I could spare the money. He called me on a Tuesday morning and told me to transfer the funds by noon so he would not miss a networking event. When I hesitated, explaining that I was in the middle of closing a major corporate tax audit, Valerie snatched the phone from him. She told me I was being a selfish, hoarding daughter who forgot where she came from. She reminded me that they put a roof over my head for 18 years and that I owed them for the basic necessities of my childhood. I sent the $4,000. They never paid me back. They never even said thank you. That was the dynamic. I was only as valuable as my last bank transfer. My accomplishments were minimized, so I would never feel confident enough to cut the financial cord. They kept me emotionally starved, so I would keep paying for the illusion of their love. But numbers do not lie, and eventually the accountant in me started auditing my own life. I looked at the emotional return on investment I was getting from my family, and the ledger was deeply in the red. I was bleeding myself dry to fund the lifestyle of people who would not even cross the street to see me succeed. Keisha's Sweet 18 was just the latest invoice they expected me to pay. $2,500 for a caterer, not for my mortgage, not for my medical bills, for a party. A lavish event for a teenager who had never worked a day in her life, thrown by parents who constantly belittled the very job that would fund the celebration. They genuinely believed I would just keep writing checks. They thought the invisible middle child would just keep buying her way back into their good graces. They underestimated the fact that a financial professional knows exactly when to close an account due to insufficient funds. My refusal to send that money was not just about the $2,500. It was about shutting down the bank entirely. The $1 transfer was a receipt. It was a formal notification that their access to my peace and my pocketbook had been permanently revoked. The group chat was still vibrating against my desk surface, moving closer to the edge with every notification. I knew exactly who would be leading the charge against my $1 rebellion. My mother might have been the architect of the toxic family structure, but she had a very willing general ready to fight her battles. And that general was currently married to my older brother. Jamal is 38 years old and currently on his seventh get-rich-quick scheme of the decade. As the only son in the family, he was raised with a level of reverence that bordered on delusion. While Keisha is the pampered miracle baby, Jamal is the supposed patriarch in training. My parents treat him like a king, despite a track record of consistent, spectacular financial ruin. He has tried cryptocurrency day trading, a luxury sneaker resale business, and a dropshipping company for organic beard oil. Every single venture required seed money from Valerie and Jerome, and when their funds ran dry, they always looked in my direction expecting me to subsidize his entrepreneurial fantasies. 3 years ago, Jamal married Ashley. Ashley is a white woman who met my brother at a corporate diversity networking mixer, where she was, ironically, the diversity and inclusion coordinator. From the moment she stepped into our family orbit, she adopted us as her personal social justice project. Ashley operates with a breathtaking level of unearned audacity, masked entirely by therapy speak and performative allyship. She is the type of woman who will use terms like systemic barriers and generational wealth, while actively talking down to the only Black woman in the room who has actually built any wealth. Ashley views my family as a charity case she is benevolently saving. She views my brother as a misunderstood genius who just needs the right woman behind him. But she views me as a direct threat. My existence contradicts her savior narrative. I am an autonomous, highly educated, financially secure Black woman who does not need her resources or her advice. Because she cannot save me, she has decided to subtly try to break me down. The microaggressions are constant and suffocating. When I purchased my 4-bedroom home in a gated community, Ashley did not congratulate me. She walked through my marble kitchen, trailing her fingers across the countertops, and asked if the neighborhood was truly safe for a single Black woman living all alone. She masks her racism and jealousy as genuine concern. She constantly makes passive-aggressive comments about how corporate America must be draining my soul and how a master's degree will not keep a man warm at night. She implies that my success is a tragedy because it makes me intimidating to men. My parents, of course, agree with her. But Ashley's true entitlement shines brightest when it comes to my professional expertise. She firmly believes that my certified public accountant license is community property. She assumes that because I am Jamal's sister, I am obligated to function as his unpaid chief financial officer. 6 months ago, Jamal decided he was going to start a luxury car rental fleet. The business plan involved leasing depreciating high-end vehicles at predatory interest rates and renting them out for music videos and weekend parties. It was a catastrophic financial idea. Ashley invited me to a coffee shop under the guise of catching up. I arrived to find her sitting at a table with a poorly formatted, unresearched business proposal slid across the wood toward my seat. She did not ask for my help. She informed me of my duties. She told me that since I crunched numbers for big corporations all day, I should easily be able to handle the tax structuring limited liability company formation and quarterly forecasting for Jamal's new empire. She expected me to do hours of complex legal and financial labor for absolutely free. "We need to keep the wealth in the community, Jasmine," she said, taking a slow sip of her iced oat milk latte. "We need to support Black business owners, and you have the skills to make sure Jamal's taxes are bulletproof." I looked at the math in her proposal. The profit margins were negative. The liability risk was astronomical. If one person crashed a leased vehicle without proper commercial insurance, Jamal would be bankrupt and my professional license could be dragged into the ensuing legal battle. I looked Ashley dead in the eye and told her absolutely not. I told her I would not work for free, and even if they paid my hourly corporate rate, I would not touch a business plan with such fatal legal and financial liabilities. I explained the math plainly and objectively. I told her the business was a sinkhole. Ashley did not listen to the math. She only heard the rejection. Her eyes welled up with the kind of weaponized tears that white women like her keep on standby for whenever they are told no by a Black woman. She gathered her papers, stood up abruptly, and told me I was being aggressive and unsupportive of my own blood. By the time I drove home from that coffee shop, my phone was already ringing. It was Valerie. Ashley had gone straight to my mother, weeping about how hostile I was to Jamal's dreams. Valerie did not care about the catastrophic financial risk. She cared about the optics. She screamed through the phone with a vitriol that still echoes in my ears. "You are tearing down a black man," she yelled. Her voice was sharp and cruel. "Your brother is trying to be a provider. He is trying to build a legacy, and you are sitting up in your big empty house looking down your nose at him. You are arrogant, Jasmine. You are bitter and jealous of his ambition because you do not have a man of your own." I sat in my car in my own driveway, gripping the steering wheel while my mother berated me. She told me that Ashley, a white woman, believed in my brother more than his own flesh and blood did. She said I was a traitor to my family for refusing to use my education to uplift Jamal. That is the absolute chokehold of my family's dynamic. You are expected to applaud a disaster as long as a man is leading it. You are expected to set yourself on fire to keep the golden sun warm. Ashley gets to play the benevolent, supportive wife standing by her man, while I am painted as the bitter, uncooperative spinster, simply because I refuse to subsidize their delusions with my hard-earned money and professional credentials. My refusal to be their unpaid consultant solidified my role as the family villain. Ashley learned that day that she could not manipulate me with social justice buzzwords, so she shifted her strategy to constant, subtle undermining. She became the whisper in my mother's ear. She became the one who stoked the fires of my parents' resentment toward my independence. Whenever Valerie needed validation for treating me poorly, Ashley was right there validating her, holding her hand and telling her that my boundaries were actually just signs of toxic individualism. That same sickening entitlement was fueling the group chat right now. I did not need to open the messages to know exactly what was happening in that digital space. Ashley was undoubtedly typing massive paragraphs of pop psychology and therapy speak. She was probably explaining to my parents how my $1 cash application transfer was a violent rejection of community care, and how I was projecting my corporate trauma onto Keisha's developmental milestones. Jamal was likely calling me a sellout who forgot where she came from. And Valerie was absorbing all of it, using their outrage to fuel her own. They all fed off each other in a perfect circle of dysfunction. They needed me to be the villain because if I was not the villain, they would have to look in the mirror and realize they were just a collection of financial failures and enablers demanding funding from the only person who had actually done the work. The group chat notifications finally stopped buzzing. The silence in my home office was thick and heavy, but it was mine. I took a deep breath of the quiet air. They thought they were punishing me with their anger. They had no idea I was already bracing for the next escalation. 2 weeks before the group chat melted down over my $1 contribution, I had driven across town for a very different reason. It was exactly 14 days before my graduation. I had fought tooth and nail for those 5 VIP tickets. The university only allocated general admission to graduate students, but I leveraged a connection with the dean of the business school to secure premium seating. I wanted my family in the front row. I wanted them to see my face when they handed me that diploma. I wanted them to witness the tangible result of 4 years of sleep deprivation. The drive to my parents' house in Decatur took 45 minutes in heavy afternoon traffic. I kept glancing at the thick, cream-colored envelope resting on my passenger seat. Inside were 5 gold-embossed passes, one for Valerie, one for Jerome, one for Jamal, one for Ashley, and one for Keisha. I had paid extra for premium parking passes, so Jerome would not have to complain about walking too far with his bad knee. I had anticipated every complaint and neutralized every excuse. I had engineered the perfect afternoon for them. I parked in their driveway behind Ashley's imported SUV, the same SUV Jamal leased using Valerie's credit score. I walked up the concrete steps and let myself in with my spare key. The air inside the house was thick with the smell of fried onions and lavender plug and air fresheners. I walked into the living room and found the usual cast of characters occupying their designated spaces. Jerome was asleep in his recliner with the sports network blaring at maximum volume. Valerie was standing at the kitchen island sorting through a towering stack of mail. And Ashley was sprawled across the good velvet sofa, her bare feet resting on my mother's expensive coffee table while she scrolled through her phone. Jamal and Keisha were nowhere to be seen, but their presence was felt in the sheer amount of space they took up in this house. I walked into the kitchen and stood across the marble island from my mother. I pulled the cream envelope from my purse and placed it deliberately on the counter. The gold foil caught the overhead kitchen lighting. "Those are the VIP tickets for my graduation," I said, keeping my voice bright and steady. 5 passes. Front row center. I also included 2 premium parking passes so Dad does not have to walk from the main garage. The ceremony is in exactly 2 weeks. I waited for the smile. I waited for the sudden gasp of pride for my mother to wipe her hands on her apron and pull me into a hug. I waited for her to yell for Jerome to wake up and look at what their daughter had accomplished. Valerie barely broke her rhythm. She glanced down at the envelope for a fraction of a second. She did not reach out to touch it. She did not open it to look at the tickets. Instead, she picked up a glossy supermarket circular and a past-due water bill and slapped them directly on top of my graduation tickets. "Just put them right there," she said, her eyes already moving to the next piece of junk mail. "I will figure out who is riding with who later. Keisha has a hair appointment that morning, so we might be running tight on time." I stared at the stack of mail covering my achievement. A grocery store advertisement featuring discounted chicken thighs was currently sitting on top of my master degree celebration. I felt a cold knot form in the center of my stomach. The dismissal was so casual, it took my breath away. It was not a fiery rejection. It was total, absolute apathy. Before I could process the indignity of my mother's reaction, Ashley decided it was the perfect moment to contribute to the conversation. She did not bother sitting up from the velvet sofa. She just shifted her weight, dropping her phone onto her chest and letting out a loud theatrical sigh. "You know," Jasmine Ashley drawled, her voice dripping with that fake sweet tone she used whenever she was about to deliver a profound insult. "I just do not understand why you push yourself to absolute exhaustion for these corporate pieces of paper. I mean, a master in taxation. It sounds so incredibly dry." I turned my head slowly to look at her. I did not say a word. I just let the silence stretch out, forcing her to sit in the awkwardness of her own audacity. But Ashley lacks the self-awareness to feel awkward. She took my silence as an invitation to continue her unsolicited psychological evaluation. "I just worry about your feminine energy," Ashley continued, waving her hand in the air as if batting away a fly. "You are in your mid-30s now. You spend all your time competing with men in these high-stress financial environments. It is hardening you. It makes you so unapproachable. At the end of the day, another degree will not keep a man warm at night. You should be focusing on building a family instead of building a resume for white corporate America." The sheer, unmitigated gall of this woman was staggering. Here was a white woman living completely off the financial enabling of my black parents, lounging on their furniture, criticizing my black excellence, while her black husband drove a car he could not afford. She was lecturing me about keeping a man warm at night, while her own marriage was an economic sinkhole funded by my parents' retirement savings. Valerie did not jump to my defense. My mother, who would have ripped the throat out of anyone who dared to criticize Keisha's makeup, simply hummed in agreement. She actually nodded along with Ashley's assessment of my life. "Well, you know how Jasmine is," Valerie said, finally looking up from her mail. "She has always been too independent for her own good. She thinks money and degrees are going to hug her back when she gets old." The air in the kitchen grew incredibly thin. The old Jasmine, the desperate middle child, would have started defending herself. I would have explained the glass ceiling. I would have outlined my stock portfolio. I would have argued that my independence was the only reason this family ever had a safety net to fall back on. I would have engaged in a bitter screaming match right there in the kitchen, trying to force them to respect me. But the new Jasmine, the corporate accountant who understood the absolute finality of a closed ledger, did none of those things. I realized in that exact moment that you cannot negotiate respect from people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Ashley wanted a reaction. Valerie wanted a performance. They wanted me to get loud and aggressive so they could point their fingers and call me the bitter, angry black woman they had already decided I was. I refused to give them the satisfaction. I refused to participate in my own degradation. I looked at the stack of junk mail bearing my VIP tickets. Then I looked at Ashley sprawling on the couch like a parasite. Finally, I looked directly into my mother's eyes. I kept my face completely devoid of emotion. My voice was quiet, flat, and carrying the absolute authority of a woman who was no longer asking for permission to exist. The ceremony begins at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I said, articulating each word with crystalline precision. The doors to the VIP section lock at 1:45. If you are not in your seats by that time, they will not let you in. I am not saving seats, and I am not checking my phone once I have my gown on. I did not wait for a response. I did not look back. I turned on my heel and walked straight out the front door. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, severing the toxic atmosphere of that house from the peaceful afternoon air. I walked down the concrete steps to my car, clicking the unlock button on my key fob. As I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, I felt a strange sense of foreboding settling over my shoulders. I had given them the tickets. I had removed every logistical barrier to their attendance. I had laid out the terms clearly and without emotion. I backed out of their driveway and merged onto the main road, heading back to the quiet sanctuary of my gated community. I gripped the leather steering wheel, letting the hum of the engine soothe my racing thoughts. Part of me, the eternal optimist that lived deep inside my ribs, still wanted to believe they would show up. I wanted to believe that when the day arrived, my parents would put on their Sunday best and come watch their daughter achieve greatness. But the analytical side of my brain, the side that audited risks and calculated probabilities, knew better. The way Valerie slapped that grocery advertisement over my tickets was a preview of things to come. I drove home knowing I had done everything perfectly right. If they chose to fail me, they would do it on their own terms. I just had no idea how breathtakingly cruel their failure was going to be. Graduation morning arrived with the strange, unfamiliar silence of an alarm clock that had been turned off. For the first time in 4 years, I woke up to the sound of birds outside my bedroom window instead of the harsh digital blare of a 5 a.m. wake-up call. I lay there in my king-sized bed, staring up at the tray ceiling, letting the absolute magnitude of the day wash over me. Today I was officially a master of science and taxation. I sat up and swung my legs over the edge of the bed, my feet sinking into the plush rug. The house was completely still. I walked into my master bathroom and looked at my reflection in the vanity mirror. I looked tired, but it was a good kind of tired. It was the deep, bone-deep exhaustion of a woman who had just climbed a mountain barefoot and finally reached the summit. Nobody sees the climb. They only see the view from the top and assume you took a helicopter. My family certainly thought my corporate success was just a byproduct of luck, or perhaps some magical inherent privilege I was hoarding. They never saw the brutal, unrelenting reality of the past 48 months. For 4 straight years, my life was a masterclass in extreme compartmentalization. I was a senior accountant at one of the top financial firms in Atlanta. Being a black woman in a predominantly white corporate financial space meant the margin for error was exactly 0. I worked 50-hour weeks standard. During tax season, those 50 hours easily bled into 70. I spent my days analyzing complex corporate tax structures, auditing multi-million-dollar ledgers, and advising corporate boards on financial risk. I wore tailored suits and walked through glass corridors projecting absolute unshakable confidence because any sign of weakness would be immediately weaponized against me. But the corporate grind was only the first shift. At 5:30 every evening, while my colleagues were heading to happy hours or going home to their families, I was rushing to the parking garage. I would change my heels for flats in the front seat of my car, eat a cold protein bar, while navigating the brutal gridlock of Atlanta rush hour traffic and drive straight to the university campus. My second shift began under the harsh fluorescent lights of a graduate school lecture hall. While my brother Jamal was drafting poorly spelled business proposals asking our parents for seed money, I was sitting in a freezing classroom studying advanced partnership taxation, international tax law, and corporate restructuring. I read textbooks until the letters blurred together. I drank so much terrible vending machine coffee that my hands had a permanent baseline tremor. I fell asleep at my kitchen island more times than I can count, waking up at 3 in the morning with a highlighter imprinted on my cheek, only to shower dress and do it all over again. The isolation of that level of ambition is profound. I missed everything. I missed Sunday brunches with my girlfriends. I missed trips to Miami and weekend getaways. I missed weddings and baby showers. I stopped dating entirely because I simply did not have the bandwidth to entertain men who were intimidated by my schedule or demanded energy I needed for my exams. My social life was reduced to text messages sent between study sessions. My friends understood. They were educated, driven Black women who knew exactly what the hustle required. They cheered me on from the sidelines, dropping off hot meals on my porch during finals week and sending voice notes of encouragement when I felt like I was going to crack under the pressure. My blood family, on the other hand, saw my absence as an insult. Every missed Sunday dinner at my parents' house was treated as a personal slight against Valerie. Every time I declined an invitation to one of Keisha's endless milestone celebrations because I had a midterm, I was branded a selfish workaholic. They never asked what I was studying. They never asked if I was exhausted. They only noticed my schedule when it inconvenienced them or when they needed me to calculate their tax returns for free. But I pushed through the guilt trips. I built a fortress around my focus. Every time Valerie made a passive-aggressive comment about my career, I studied harder. Every time Ashley tried to lecture me about systemic barriers while spending my parents' money, I aced another exam. I channeled every ounce of their toxicity into fuel. The master degree was not just a credential to secure my promotion to director. It was my armor. It was undeniable, tangible proof of my autonomy. Now the grueling marathon was finally over. I walked out of my bathroom and stepped into the guest bedroom where my graduation regalia hung perfectly steamed and ready on the back of the door. The thick black robe felt heavy in my hands. I slipped it over my shoulders, letting the dark fabric drape around me. I picked up the velvet hood lined with the specific colors of the business college and adjusted it around my neck. I walked back to the full-length mirror in my hallway. I put the square black cap on my head carefully, arranging the tassels so it hung perfectly straight. I stood there looking at the woman in the glass. The dark circles under my eyes were expertly concealed. My natural hair was styled flawlessly. My posture was straight and unyielding. I looked powerful. I felt a quiet, hard-earned excitement bubbling up in my chest. This was my day. I had bought and paid for this moment with my own sweat and sanity. I checked my watch. It was 10 o'clock in the morning. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The VIP doors would lock at 1:45. I had done everything I could to facilitate my family being there. I had given them the premium tickets, the parking passes, and the exact timeline. I had set the table perfectly. All they had to do was show up and sit down. I walked into my kitchen and poured my morning coffee. I did not check my phone for messages from them. I did not send a reminder text. I had drawn a hard boundary in my mother's kitchen 2 weeks ago, and I was going to stick to it. I was going to drive to the university, walk across that stage, and claim my victory. I felt a flutter of anticipation, hoping against my own better judgment that I would look out into the front row and see my father smiling, see my mother actually looking proud. I wanted them to be there. I really did. I rinsed my coffee mug, grabbed my car keys, and walked out into the bright Georgia sunshine. The drive to the university campus was a victory lap. I rolled the windows down and let the warm air fill the car. Today was going to be a celebration of Black excellence, of resilience, and of breaking generational curses. I pulled into the graduate parking structure feeling absolutely invincible. I had no idea I was walking straight into a silence so loud it would permanently deafen my capacity to forgive. I walked through the heavy glass doors of the university arena and was immediately swallowed by a tidal wave of chaotic joy. The concourse was packed shoulder to shoulder with vibrating energy. You could feel the pride radiating off the walls. I navigated through the crowd, taking in the cultural vibrancy of a graduation in Atlanta. There were grandmothers holding massive bouquets wrapped in clear plastic, fathers wearing crisp suits, and entire extended families coordinating in custom airbrushed t-shirts bearing the faces of their graduates. It was a loud, unapologetic celebration of survival and success. I blended into the sea of black gowns, but my eyes were constantly scanning the crowd looking for familiar faces. I checked my watch. It was 1:30 in the afternoon. I made my way down the concrete stairs to the arena floor where the graduates were being seated. I found my assigned folding chair and sat down, smoothing the dark fabric of my robe over my knees. The arena was freezing, but my palms were sweating. I looked up toward the left side of the stadium where the VIP access seating was cordoned off by velvet ropes. At 1:45, the heavy acoustic doors to the premium seating area were pulled shut by the event staff. The heavy metal latches clicked into place, echoing softly in my mind. I pulled my phone from the small crossbody purse hidden under my gown. The screen was dark. I unlocked it, expecting a flurry of notifications. I expected a text from Jamal complaining about the parking garage. I expected a call from Jerome asking for directions to their specific row. I expected Ashley to be messaging the group chat about how the stadium seating was hurting her back. There was absolutely nothing. The screen was completely blank. My battery was full. My signal was strong. There was no technical glitch blocking their communication. The rational part of my brain, the part that audits multi-million-dollar ledgers, immediately started running the variables. Atlanta traffic is notorious, so maybe there was an accident on the interstate. Maybe Jerome experienced car trouble. Maybe Keisha ran late at her hair appointment and Ashley threw a fit about riding in a cramped vehicle. But the variable that broke the equation was the absolute silence. If you are stuck in traffic, you send a text message. If a car breaks down, you make a frantic phone call. Total digital silence from 5 different adults requires a deliberate and unified choice. The ceremony officially began. The university president approached the podium and the speeches blurred into a dull hum of generic inspiration. I was not listening to a single word. My eyes were locked on the front row of the VIP section. I knew exactly where my tickets had been assigned. Section A, row 1, seats 12 through 16. I scanned the row. Seat 10 was occupied by an older woman in a beautiful yellow dress. Seat 11 was a man holding a professional camera lens. Seats 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16 were empty. 5 consecutive vacant chairs glaring back at me in a sold-out arena. They looked like a gaping wound in the middle of a perfect smile. The bright red upholstery of those empty seats stood out under the intense stadium lighting like a beacon of my own foolishness. Every other seat in that entire section was filled with people leaning forward, waiting to catch a glimpse of their graduate crossing the stage. My row was a barren wasteland. The business college was called to stand. We filed out of our rows and lined up along the edge of the staging ramp. My heart was beating a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I moved forward mechanically, watching the person in front of me step up the stairs. I stepped onto the ramp. The stage director checked my name card and handed it to the announcer. I stepped directly into the harsh spotlight. Jasmine, Master of Science in Taxation. The announcer spoke my name clearly into the microphone. His voice echoed across the massive arena, bouncing off the high concrete walls. This was the moment. This was the exact fraction of a second I had been dreaming about for 4 exhausting years. In Black families, graduation ceremonies are participatory events. When a name is called, you expect an absolute explosion of sound. You expect air horns to blast from the upper decks. You expect a mother to scream, "That is my baby," at the top of her lungs. You expect a father to stand up and block the view of the people behind him out of pure, overwhelming pride. I walked to the center of the stage. I took the leather diploma cover from the dean and shook his hand. I turned my body to face the audience and looked directly at Section A, Row 1. There was dead silence. It was the kind of silence that rings in your ears. The kind of silence that physically sucks the oxygen straight out of your lungs. Polite, generic applause rippled through the stadium from strangers who were just clapping to fill the void. But from my designated premium seats, there was absolutely nothing. The 5 empty chairs sat there mocking me. They were not just vacant, they were violently empty. The physical sensation of being entirely ghosted by my own bloodline hit me right in the center of my chest. It was not sadness. I did not shed a single tear. It was a heavy, crushing realization that dropped my core temperature by 10 degrees. I felt the corporate smile freeze on my face. The muscles in my jaw locked tight. My vision narrowed until all I could see was that block of unoccupied red upholstery. They actually did it. They actively and collectively chose to abandon me on the biggest professional day of my life. Valerie chose not to be here. Jerome chose not to be here. Jamal and Ashley chose not to be here. Keisha chose not to be here. I walked off the opposite side of the stage and posed for the mandatory professional photograph. I looked directly into the camera lens and flashed a perfect, unbothered smile. The flash went off, capturing a woman who had just been completely severed from her foundation. I returned to my seat on the arena floor. The rest of the ceremony happened in a vacuum. Names were called, cheers erupted, families celebrated. I sat perfectly still with my hands folded in my lap, resting on top of the empty leather diploma case. I did not reach for my phone again. The urge to check for a delayed text message or a missed call was permanently gone. The silence had provided all the information I would ever need. When a client refuses to pay an invoice, you do not keep sending them the product. You close the account, you cut your losses, you accept that the investment was a failure, and you move forward with your remaining capital. My family had been operating on my emotional credit for 35 years. They had consistently defaulted on every single payment of basic respect and common decency. Today was the final notice. I sat in that folding chair surrounded by thousands of celebrating people, and I felt a profound fundamental shift in my psychological structure. The desperate middle child who wanted her mother's approval evaporated. The dutiful sister who tried to buy her way into her family's good graces was gone. What was left behind was purely the corporate accountant. I calculated the total deficit of this relationship, and the math was crystal clear. They were morally bankrupt. I was the only asset they had, and they just left me sitting alone in a stadium. I did not wait for the final recession. As soon as the closing remarks began and the crowd shifted, I stood up from my folding chair. I slipped out through the side exit, pushing past the heavy acoustic doors and stepping into the humid afternoon heat. The campus was already swarming with early exiters, taking photos by the fountains and statues. I walked past them with my head high, the heavy black robe billowing around my legs. I did not feel the sting of tears. I just felt a cold, hyper-focused drive to get to my vehicle. I found my car on the 3rd level of the parking garage. The heavy thud of the car door closing behind me severed the sounds of the celebration outside. I started the engine and let the air conditioning blast against my face, cooling the sweat that had beaded at my hairline. The silence of the leather interior was a stark contrast to the stadium I had just fled. I unzipped my graduation gown and let it fall away from my shoulders. I tossed the velvet hood onto the passenger seat right next to the empty leather diploma case. I picked up my phone from the center console. I was not checking for missed calls or apologetic text messages anymore. The time for excuses had expired the second I walked across that stage. But human instinct is a stubborn thing. A gut feeling, a sudden sharp intuition urged me to open Instagram. It was not a search for comfort. It was a search for evidence. As an accountant, I know that when the ledger does not balance, you follow the paper trail. In this family, Ashley was the paper trail. She documented every breathing second of her proximity to my Black family to maintain her social media aesthetic. I opened the app. At the very top of my feed, Ashley's profile picture was circled by a glowing ring, indicating she was broadcasting live. The caption flashing across the bottom of the screen read, "Sweet 18 Princess Duties." I tapped the screen. The quiet sanctuary of my car was instantly invaded by the high-pitched screeching of my sister-in-law. Ashley was holding the phone high, angling the camera to capture the entire room. They were not just at a local mall. They were standing in the center of an exclusive luxury bridal and event boutique. I recognized the gold-plated mirrors and the crystal chandeliers immediately. It was a high-end designer showroom located a full 2 hours away in a completely different city. The kind of place that requires appointments booked months in advance and requires a minimum spending deposit just to walk through the doors. The camera panned across the pristine white showroom floor. There was my father Jerome sitting on a velvet-tufted sofa, holding a crystal flute of complimentary champagne. He was laughing at something Jamal was saying. My brother was standing next to a rack of glittering gowns, holding 3 designer shopping bags. Then the camera flipped to the center stage. Keisha was standing on a circular pedestal surrounded by floor-to-ceiling mirrors. She was wearing a massive sequined ball gown that looked like it cost more than my first car. Valerie, my mother, was standing right behind her, adjusting the tulle skirt with tears of genuine joy shining in her eyes. Valerie looked at the camera and blew a kiss, telling the viewers that her miracle baby deserved nothing but the absolute best for her milestone birthday. I sat in the driver's seat of my car staring at the bright screen. I calculated the logistics in my head. To be at that specific boutique 2 hours away in a different city sipping champagne by 2:30 in the afternoon, they would have had to leave Atlanta by noon, right when they were supposed to be driving to my graduation ceremony. They did not get stuck in traffic. They did not experience a sudden emergency. They woke up this morning, put on their designer clothes, piled into Jamal's leased sport utility vehicle, and deliberately drove 2 hours in the opposite direction. Ashley's voice narrated the entire scene. She gushed to her followers about how important it is to celebrate Black joy and support family milestones. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of a white woman preaching about family milestones while actively participating in the ghosting of my graduation was almost impressive. She flipped the camera back to her face, taking a sip of her champagne and reminding everyone to drop a heart emoji for the birthday girl. They literally chose a dress fitting over my graduation. They chose tulle and sequins for a teenager over a master's degree for the woman who consistently funded their survival. Valerie was crying tears of joy over a piece of fabric while completely ignoring the fact that her middle child was walking across a university stage in a cap and gown. Jerome was drinking free champagne while my 5 front-row VIP tickets sat completely unused in a stadium an hour away. The slap in the face was not just the absence, it was the joy. They were not hiding. They were not ashamed. They were broadcasting their betrayal to the entire world without a single thought about how it would affect me. They knew I would see it. They simply did not care. My achievements were so entirely irrelevant to them that my graduation day was treated as a blank spot on the calendar, perfectly suited for a shopping trip. I watched the live video for 3 full minutes. I did not leave a comment. I did not exit the app. I forced myself to watch every single second of their celebration. I watched Valerie pull out a credit card to pay for a matching tiara. I watched Jamal hype up his little sister, telling her she looked like a queen. I watched them function as a complete, happy, unified family unit that simply did not include me. The video was a perfectly framed portrait of their priorities. I was the financial safety net kept in the dark and only brought out when a bill needed paying. Keisha was the prize meant to be displayed and celebrated at all costs. If they had stayed home and done nothing, the disrespect would have been passive. But this was active. This was a highly coordinated operation. Securing an afternoon appointment at a luxury boutique requires planning. Gathering 5 adults and coordinating a road trip to a different city requires communication. They had to actively discuss the schedule, look at the clock, and mutually agree that driving away from my university was the correct decision. Every single adult in that room made a conscious choice to skip my graduation. I pressed the lock button on my phone, silencing Ashley's grating voice. The screen went black, reflecting my own face back at me. I looked at the dark circles under my eyes, the evidence of 4 years of sleep deprivation. I looked at the heavy graduation gown puddled in my lap. The absolute absurdity of the situation stripped away any lingering desire to be loved by these people. You cannot reason with individuals who genuinely believe a sweet 18 dress fitting holds more cultural and familial weight than a master of science in taxation. You cannot demand respect from people who sip champagne on camera while their daughter sits alone in a parking garage. I placed the phone face down on the leather center console of my car. I sat perfectly still, waiting for the tears to come. I waited for the familiar hot prickle behind my eyes, for the thick lump to form in my throat, for the devastating sob that usually follows a betrayal of this absolute magnitude. I expected the profound grief of a daughter who had just been discarded. But my eyes remained completely dry. My breathing was slow and measured. The grief that should have shattered me into pieces did not manifest as sorrow. Instead, it instantly calcified into a cold and absolute clarity. It felt like a heavy block of ice settling perfectly into the center of my chest, freezing over decades of desperate yearning. For 35 years, I had been operating under the desperate delusion that if I just achieved enough, if I just provided enough financial support, if I just proved my worth through impeccable credentials, I could eventually earn their love. Watching that live video did not break my heart. It cured my delusion. The emotional hemorrhage I had been suffering from since childhood finally stopped. I was no longer a wounded middle child begging for a seat at her own family table. I was an auditor finalizing a bankrupt account. The ledger was permanently closed. I reached up and pulled the bobby pins from my hair, freeing the square black graduation cap from my head. I did not handle it with care or reverence. I tossed it carelessly into the passenger seat right on top of the velvet academic hood. It landed with a soft thud next to the empty leather diploma case. I put the car in drive and navigated my way out of the parking structure, merging onto the sun-baked Atlanta interstate. The traffic was heavy, but my mind was completely unburdened. The standard protocol for a family dispute usually involves a barrage of angry texts. It involves calling your mother and demanding an explanation. It involves crying to your brother and asking how they could do something so incredibly malicious on a day you worked 4 years to achieve. I did none of those things. I did not open my messaging app. I did not draft a single angry paragraph. I did not demand an apology. Begging for an explanation from people who intentionally plot to hurt you is just giving them the roadmap to do it again. I refuse to give them another ounce of my energy. An angry text would only feed Valerie's victim complex. A tearful phone call would only give Ashley more material to psychoanalyze me with her fake concern. I realized that my silence was the most lethal weapon I possessed, because it was the only reaction they could not weaponize against me. Driving north on the highway, I felt a physical sensation of release. The invisible cord of familial obligation, the heavy chain of cultural expectations that dictates you must endure abuse simply because you share genetics, snapped completely. In the Black community, there is a toxic loyalty drilled into us from birth. You are taught that family is everything, that you must honor your parents, no matter how heavily they disrespect your boundaries, that you must carry the dead weight of your siblings because blood is thicker than water. That ideology is a trap. It is a carefully constructed cage designed to keep successful, ambitious people tethered to their own degradation. I realized with absolute certainty that my mother did not want a daughter, she wanted a sponsor. Jamal did not want a sister, he wanted a safety net for his financial incompetence. Ashley just wanted a prop for her savior complex to make herself feel superior. And Keisha just wanted an audience to fund her coronation. I was none of those things. I was a corporate financial executive who had just reclaimed 100% of her own equity. The cord was cut. The bridge was burned. I was officially and permanently done. I pulled up to the security gates of my community. The guard waved me through, and I drove up my quiet, pristine driveway. I parked in my garage and walked through the front door of my 4-bedroom house, locking the heavy deadbolt behind me. The house was immaculate. The air conditioning was perfectly chilled. The silence inside my home was not lonely, it was incredibly luxurious. I walked upstairs to my master bedroom and took off the heavy black graduation robe. I hung it in the back of my closet, closing the door on the entire academic chapter. I did not take photos for social media to prove my worth to strangers. I did not announce my degree to the void of the internet. I changed into comfortable silk loungewear and went down to my kitchen to make a fresh cup of dark roast coffee. My phone sat on the marble kitchen island, completely silent. They were still at that luxury boutique 2 hours away, sipping complimentary champagne and holding up sequined dresses on my emotional dime. They assumed I was sitting in my house, crying over their absence, waiting for them to acknowledge my existence. They assumed I would swallow the disrespect just like I always did because I was conditioned to fear losing them. They assumed I would still be ready to write the next check whenever Valerie snapped her fingers. They were operating on severely outdated financial data. The Bank of Jasmine was permanently closed. I took a slow sip of my coffee and let the quiet afternoon wash over me. The ghosting was the best graduation gift they could have ever given me. By showing me exactly how little I mattered to them, they absolved me of any future responsibility for their survival. They set me free. And I was going to enjoy every single second of my new freedom right up until the moment they inevitably realized their mistake and came looking for my wallet. 3 days passed. 72 hours of absolute radio silence from the people who share my DNA. I did not spend those 3 days crying in my bed or staring blankly out the window waiting for an explanation. I woke up on Monday morning, put on a tailored charcoal gray suit, and drove straight back to my office at the financial firm. I had corporate tax audits to finalize and a promotion to secure. I poured my energy into the very career my family constantly belittled because that career is exactly what pays my mortgage and funds my peace. Tuesday morning arrived with the usual fast-paced corporate rhythm. I was sitting at my mahogany desk on the 30th floor of my office building overlooking the Atlanta skyline. I had 2 large computer monitors displaying complex partnership tax structures for an upcoming corporate merger. The numbers were clean. The ledgers were balanced. Everything in my professional life made perfect logical sense. Then my personal cell phone lit up on my desk. It was a text message from Valerie. It had been exactly 4 days since we last communicated when I drove across town to drop off those 5 premium graduation tickets. I picked up the phone. I did not feel the familiar spike of anxiety in my chest. I just felt a clinical, detached curiosity. I unlocked the screen. The message was not a long paragraph. It was not a tearful apology blaming a sudden medical emergency or a broken-down car for their absence at my graduation. It did not contain the word sorry. It did not contain the word congratulations. The text read exactly like this. Need $2,500 for Keisha's Sweet 18. Send it by Friday so we can finalize the caterer. I stared at those 2 sentences. I read them over and over again, analyzing the sheer breathtaking audacity of the syntax. There was no greeting. There was no "Hi, Jasmine, how are you doing?" There was no "please." It was a direct imperative command issued from a master to a servant. Need $2,500. Not "we are short on cash." Not "could you possibly help us out?" Just a cold, hard demand for my money. This text message was not just a request for funds. It was a highly calculated psychological power play. Valerie was operating on a very specific toxic playbook. By completely ignoring the fact that she and the rest of the family had ghosted my graduation, she was attempting to erase the event entirely. In her mind, if she did not acknowledge my master degree, then my achievement simply did not exist. She was trying to force a hard reset of our dynamic back to the factory settings where I am nothing more than a silent, heavily funded safety net. Valerie assumed that ignoring me on Saturday would break my spirit. She assumed that leaving me alone in that stadium would make me desperate for their attention. In toxic family dynamics, the silent treatment is often used as a weapon of behavioral modification. They starve you of affection so that when they finally reach out, you are so relieved that you will agree to anything just to be allowed back into the fold. She sent that text fully expecting me to immediately wire the money as a peace offering to buy my way back into their good graces. I looked away from my phone and glanced at the beautiful, massive floral arrangement sitting on the corner of my desk. My colleagues had ordered it for me. The senior partners at my firm had taken me out to an expensive lunch on Monday to celebrate my new degree. They had raised glasses of sparkling water and toasted my relentless work ethic. Strangers and corporate associates treated my educational milestone with immense respect and genuine warmth. Meanwhile, my own mother could not even type the word congratulations before demanding $2,500 to feed her friends at a party for a teenager. And let us talk about that caterer. $2,500 for food at a Sweet 18. Keisha is a high school student who does not even have a part-time job. She has never paid a utility bill or purchased her own groceries. Yet Valerie and Jerome were throwing her a party that rivaled a small wedding. They were booking professional high-end catering for a teenager while possessing absolutely zero capital to actually pay the invoice. They signed the contract with the caterer, fully expecting my bank account to absorb the financial impact. They spent my money before they even asked for it. I knew exactly how this text message came to be. Valerie did not write this in a vacuum. She was likely sitting in her living room with Ashley and Jamal when she hit send. I could picture the scene perfectly. Jamal probably complained that the catering menu was not extravagant enough to impress his friends. Ashley probably used her therapeutic buzzwords telling Valerie that as the matriarch, she had every right to redistribute the wealth within the family unit to create core memories for Keisha. They probably laughed and told Valerie to just send the text knowing good. And well, I had never once refused a direct financial demand from my mother. They sat around plotting how to extract my resources without ever planning to acknowledge my humanity. I set the phone back down on my desk. The screen went dark. A few days ago, a text like this would have sent me into a downward spiral of rage and hurt. I would have typed out a massive response demanding to know why they skipped my graduation to go dress shopping. I would have outlined how deeply they wounded me. I would have begged for them to see my value as a human being instead of a bank account. But the ice block in my chest remained perfectly frozen. You cannot reason with a parasite. You can only cut off its food supply. I let the phone sit there for a full hour. I returned my attention to my computer monitors and finished reviewing the corporate tax structures. I answered emails from high-net-worth clients. I operated with total professional efficiency. I made Valerie wait. I wanted the silence to stretch out. I wanted her to look at her phone, wondering why the automated teller machine was not dispensing the cash immediately. I wanted the catering deadline to start burning a hole in her mind. When you finally see your toxic family members for exactly who they are, their manipulation tactics lose all of their power. The text message was not hurtful anymore, it was just pathetic. It was the desperate grasping of a woman who had vastly overestimated her leverage. She thought she was dealing with the insecure middle child who would do anything for a scrap of maternal love. She had no idea she was dealing with a corporate financial executive who had just permanently closed the ledger. Exactly 60 minutes after Valerie sent her demand, I picked up my cell phone from the corner of my mahogany desk. I did not open my text messages. I bypassed my messaging application entirely and opened my banking app. Ignoring a text message leaves room for interpretation. It leaves a tiny window of plausible deniability where the sender can assume you are simply busy in a meeting or driving or asleep. It allows them to maintain the illusion of control. I did not want to leave any room for interpretation. I wanted absolute crystalline clarity. I wanted Valerie to know that I saw her demand, I read her demand, and I was actively consciously denying it. I navigated to the transfer portal and typed in my mother's username. The app prompted me for an amount. I did not type zero. I typed exactly $1.00. I tapped the memo line and typed a single word. Congrats. I selected the instant transfer option, intentionally paying the 25-cent processing fee just to ensure the funds bypassed the standard clearing time and landed in her available balance the very second I pressed confirm. I hit send. I locked my phone, set it back down on my desk, and took a slow sip of my bottled water. It took exactly 3 minutes for the explosion to breach the surface. My phone vibrated against the desk wood with a sudden violent intensity. It did not just buzz once. It began a continuous rapid-fire vibration that sounded like a swarm of angry hornets trapped inside the casing. The notifications were not coming through as individual text messages. They were pouring into the family group chat. The chat was ironically named Forever Family. I had tried to leave that group chat 3 separate times over the past 4 years, but Valerie would simply add me right back, complaining that I was breaking the family structure. Today, I was finally going to break it permanently. I unlocked my screen and opened the chat. I did not type a single letter. I simply sat back in my ergonomic office chair and watched them absolutely unravel in real time. Valerie was the first to strike. Her messages came through in fragmented, furious bursts of all capital letters. What is this? Jasmine, call me right now. Do not play games with me. You know exactly what the caterer costs. I told you I needed 2,500. What am I supposed to do with $1? Are you out of your mind? I watched the gray speech bubbles populate the screen, feeling a cold, detached amusement. She was not angry about the disrespect. She was panicking because the vault door had just slammed shut on her fingers. She had already committed to a catering contract for a lavish Sweet 18 party operating on the absolute certainty that my corporate salary would cover her fraudulent lifestyle. Now she was staring down the barrel of a massive invoice with zero liquid capital to satisfy the debt. Before Valerie could finish her digital tantrum, Jamal entered the chat. My older brother operates entirely on projected insecurities. Whenever he feels financially inadequate, which is always his default defense mechanism, is to attack my character. His messages flooded in right beneath Valerie's demands. You are actually sick in the head, Jamal typed. You are really sitting up in that big, empty house completely miserable. You are 35 years old acting bitter and jealous of a little girl. Keisha is your blood sister, and you are trying to ruin her milestone birthday because you are mad at the world. You have all that money and no heart. You are a complete sellout. I read his words and felt nothing but clinical pity. Jamal was 38 years old, driving a leased luxury sport utility vehicle. He could not afford living in a house my parents helped him rent, and he had the audacity to call me miserable. He accused me of being jealous of an 18-year-old high school student. Jealous of what, exactly? I have a Master of Science in taxation, a massive stock portfolio, and a customized 4-bedroom home. Keisha does not even have a checking account. Jamal was not angry because he cared about Keisha's party. Jamal was terrified. He realized in that exact moment that if the automated teller machine was permanently closed for the miracle baby, it was permanently closed for his next inevitable business failure. His safety net had just evaporated, and he was lashing out in pure economic panic. Then came the grand finale. I saw the typing indicator bubble pop up next to Ashley's name. The 3 gray dots pulsed on the screen for a very long time, indicating that she was drafting a massive paragraph. When her message finally pushed through, it was a breathtaking masterpiece of weaponized therapy speak and performative social justice jargon. Ashley, a white woman who actively drained resources from a black family, decided it was time to educate me on my cultural obligations. Hey, sis! Ashley began utilizing that fake forced familiarity that always made my skin crawl. I really think we need to have a dialogue about community care and divesting from toxic individualism. When you hoard your corporate resources instead of circulating them within the family unit, you are actively participating in the same systemic barriers that hold Black families back. We are trying to build generational wealth and create core memories for Keisha. Your decision to send $1 is a violent rejection of your community. Healing means showing up for your village even when you feel triggered. We expect you to do the right thing and wire the remaining balance so we can move forward with love. I sat in my office staring at her sprawling gray text bubble. The sheer, unmitigated, unearned audacity of her message was staggering. I read the words generational wealth and actually let out a sharp, cold laugh that echoed in the quiet of my office. Ashley was lecturing me, a highly successful corporate certified public accountant, about building generational wealth. Generational wealth is built by acquiring appreciating assets, funding retirement accounts, maintaining excellent credit, and securing advanced education. Generational wealth is not built by throwing a $2,500 catering budget at a teenager's birthday party while relying on someone else to foot the bill. She was confusing generational wealth with generational debt, and she was trying to use buzzwords to guilt me into financing their financial illiteracy. They all thought this aggressive, coordinated digital attack would break me. They assumed that if they bombarded me with enough guilt, shame, and aggressive manipulation, I would panic. They expected me to start furiously typing defensive paragraphs. They expected me to apologize for misunderstanding the assignment and immediately transfer the funds to prove I was not a bitter, jealous sellout. They thought the threat of their collective disapproval was the worst possible consequence I could face. They were wrong. I did not feel shame. I did not feel guilt. I did not feel the desperate urge to explain myself or defend my character. Looking at their frantic, entitled text messages, I just felt a profound, overwhelming sense of exhaustion. I was tired of carrying the dead weight of their financial incompetence. I was tired of being the villain in a story written by people who could not even afford their own props. I did not type a single letter in response. I did not defend my decision. I did not point out that they had deliberately skipped my graduation ceremony just 3 days prior to go dress shopping for this exact party. Explaining your boundaries to people who profit from violating them is a complete waste of time. I tapped the details icon in the upper right corner of the family group chat. I scrolled down past the list of their names. I found the toggle switch labeled Hide Alerts. I pressed my finger against the screen and slid the toggle to the right. The button turned bright green. I tapped the second option to leave the conversation, entirely deleting the chat history from my device. The screen cleared. The violent vibration of my phone completely stopped. I placed the phone face down on the polished wood of my desk. The silence in my office was absolute, and it was beautiful. I turned my chair back toward my dual computer monitors. I had a multi-million-dollar corporate merger to audit, and I was not going to waste another second of my billable hours entertaining the delusions of people who were fully committed to misunderstanding me. I went back to work, completely unaware that their digital panic was about to escalate into a full-blown physical invasion of my property. The drive home from the financial firm that evening was uneventful. I navigated the heavy Atlanta traffic with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had just amputated a gangrenous limb. Leaving the group chat was an act of profound structural maintenance. I pulled up to the heavy iron gates of my subdivision, swiped my resident access fob, and drove through. I waved at the evening security detail stationed at the guardhouse. My neighborhood is a fortress. It is a highly restricted community that requires pre-authorization for every single visitor. I pulled my car into my attached garage, locked the doors, and stepped into the absolute serenity of my home. I changed out of my corporate suit and poured myself a glass of cold water. I walked into my home office and woke up my personal laptop. As a corporate accountant, I maintain a strict division between my professional communications and my personal inbox. I clicked open my personal email account, intending to quickly clear out the day's promotional spam and automated billing receipts before going to sleep. Scrolling through the list of unread messages, a specific subject line highlighted in urgent red text instantly stopped my cursor. It was an automated security alert generated by my homeowner association portal. The email was flagged as a high-priority access violation. My community utilizes a sophisticated digital system for guest management. Residents log into a portal to submit visitor names, license plate numbers, and expected arrival times. If a resident attempts to authorize an unusually high number of guests for a single day, the system automatically suspends the request and generates a security alert requiring direct verification from the homeowner. I clicked open the email. The message stated that a bulk upload of guest passes had been attempted for my specific lot number. I logged directly into the resident portal, entering my secure credentials to view the pending requests. The screen loaded, displaying a digital queue of unauthorized visitors. I stared at the numbers populating the dashboard. Attached to the pending request was a formatted spreadsheet containing exactly 150 names. It also included 3 commercial vehicles listed under a local catering company and 2 vehicles registered to a mobile disc jockey service. The requested entry window was for this coming Saturday between the hours of 4 in the afternoon and midnight. I checked the user activity log to see exactly how this request had bypassed my 2-factor authentication. The digital footprint was clear. The upload was initiated from a secondary guest account. 2 years ago, when I had to fly to London for a sudden corporate audit, I had created a temporary sub-account for Ashley so she could water my indoor plants and check on the property. Like a fool, I had never revoked her digital access. She had retained the login credentials and weaponized them. Ashley had logged into the security portal using her proximity to my life to try and authorize 150 teenagers, a professional sound system, and a full catering crew to pass through the heavily guarded gates of my neighborhood. She tried to override the system, hoping the automated approval would process before I ever checked my email. I leaned back in my ergonomic desk chair. The sheer criminal audacity of the operation began to unfold in my mind like a schematic blueprint. The pieces of the puzzle clicked together with terrifying precision. Why this coming Saturday? I looked at the large, dry erase calendar hanging on the wall of my office. This coming weekend was blocked off in bold red marker. I was scheduled to be in Chicago. I had purchased non-refundable flight tickets and booked hotel accommodations months ago to attend the National Accounting Conference. I remembered mentioning the trip during a rare family dinner back in February. They had completely tuned out my explanation of the conference, but they had perfectly retained the dates of my travel schedule. They knew I had a flight out on Friday evening and a return flight on Sunday afternoon. They knew my house was going to be completely vacant for exactly 48 hours. The true nature of Valerie's demanding text message finally made absolute sense. They were not just demanding $2,500 to pay a caterer for a party at some rented community center. They had already booked the caterer to come directly to my house. They were demanding my money to pay the very people who were going to serve food inside my own kitchen while I was completely out of state. The scope of their entitlement was breathtaking. To coordinate 150 guests, you do not just send a text message the week of the event. You send physical invitations. Weeks ago, my mother and sister-in-law had to have designed, ordered, and mailed physical invitations or digital flyers listing my private address as the official venue for Keisha's Sweet 18. They had distributed the location of my personal sanctuary to over 100 high school students without ever asking for my permission or even informing me of the plan. They were orchestrating a full-scale home invasion disguised as a family celebration. I knew exactly how they intended to gain physical access to the property. When I first closed on the house, I had given Valerie a spare emergency key. I gave it to her against my own better judgment because she had guilt-tripped me about safety protocols and what would happen if I ever had a medical emergency living alone. She had kept that key on her keychain for 3 years. The delusion required to execute this plan was staggering. Valerie and Ashley planned to use that spare key to unlock my custom front door. They planned to let 150 unsupervised teenagers trample across my pristine hardwood floors, spill drinks on my expensive imported rugs, and treat my heavily curated sanctuary like a cheap rented banquet hall. They fully expected to throw a massive, loud, destructive party on Saturday night, clean up the visible trash on Sunday morning, and lock the door behind them before my flight from Chicago landed. They assumed I would walk into my house on Sunday evening completely oblivious. They thought they could use my home as a free luxury venue and use my corporate salary to fund the menu, all while treating me with such profound disrespect that they ghosted my graduation just days prior. I sat in the quiet glow of my computer monitors. I did not feel a single ounce of panic. I did not feel fear. I felt the absolute hyper-focused calm of an auditor who has just uncovered massive corporate fraud. They thought they were running a brilliant covert operation. They thought they had outsmarted the bitter middle child. They had no idea that their entire master plan was currently displayed on my screen, fully documented and completely exposed. I did not call the police right then. I did not call my mother to scream at her. Confronting them now would only give them the opportunity to lie, deny, and scatter. If you want to catch a rat, you do not warn them about the trap. You just put the cheese down and wait. I reached for my mouse and firmly clicked the red button on the portal that read, "Deny all unauthorized access." Then I opened a new browser tab. I had to cancel a flight to Chicago and book a premium locksmith. I navigated away from the Homeowner Association security portal and immediately opened a new browser tab for my airline application. It took exactly 4 clicks to cancel my flight to Chicago. I did not feel a single ounce of regret watching the confirmation screen flash across my monitor, telling me my non-refundable ticket was voided. I opened another tab and canceled my luxury hotel suite near the conference center. I was supposed to attend high-level networking events and tax seminars that weekend, but professional development can wait. Protecting my most valuable financial asset from a coordinated family invasion takes absolute precedence over any corporate event. My colleagues would assume I was dealing with a sudden illness. My family would assume I was currently navigating airport security and boarding a plane to the Midwest. Both assumptions provided the perfect cover for the defensive operation I was about to execute. At 8 o'clock on Wednesday morning, I made a phone call to a premium commercial locksmith service in Atlanta. I did not want a standard residential rekey. I wanted a fortress. I requested a senior technician come out immediately for a comprehensive security overhaul. By noon, a white service van was parked in my driveway. I stood in my foyer drinking sparkling water while the technician systematically removed every single lock on my property. He replaced the hardware on the front door, the back patio entrance, the garage access door, and the side gate. Everything was completely swapped out for high-security drill-resistant smart deadbolts. I held the heavy new brass keys in my hand, feeling the cold weight of absolute control. That old spare key sitting on Valerie's keychain, the one she thought was her golden ticket to a free luxury venue, was now nothing more than a useless, jagged piece of metal. But physical locks were only the first layer of my defense strategy. You do not just lock out a parasite, you document its attempt to breach the perimeter. I contacted my smart home security provider and ordered an immediate hardware upgrade. Within 24 hours, a crew had installed brand new 4K resolution cameras around the entire exterior of my home. I had them positioned strategically to cover every possible angle of the front porch, the driveway, the side walkways, and the backyard patio. I specifically requested premium models with high-fidelity audio recording capabilities. When Ashley and Valerie inevitably showed up and realized their master plan was collapsing, I did not just want to see their faces. I wanted to hear every single word of their entitlement captured in crystal-clear high-definition audio. I linked the entire security system directly to a dedicated tablet and propped it up on my kitchen island. I tested the feed. The picture was flawless. I could hear the wind rustling the leaves on the trees outside. The final piece of the perimeter defense required a personal visit. On Friday afternoon, exactly 24 hours before the fabricated Suite 18 was scheduled to begin, I drove my car down to the main security guardhouse at the entrance of my gated community. I walked into the security office carrying a printed dossier. I handed the head of security a clear plastic folder containing high-quality color photographs of Jerome, Valerie, Jamal, and Ashley. I looked the security chief directly in the eyes and delivered my instructions with cold corporate precision. I stated that the individuals in these photographs were explicitly and permanently banned from accessing the community under my lot number. I informed him that they had attempted to fraudulently register a massive guest list for an unauthorized event at my address. I mandated that if they arrived at the gate, they were to be flagged as hostile trespassers. I specifically warned him about Ashley. I told him that a white woman would likely be in the vehicle and she would absolutely attempt to use her tears and entitlement to bypass the security protocols. The security chief, a retired police officer who had seen every trick in the book, took one look at the fraudulent catering logistics and nodded grimly. He locked their names and faces into the neighborhood denial registry. My perimeter was officially and completely sealed. Saturday morning arrived with the heavy, humid heat typical of a Georgia spring. The air outside was thick, but the air inside my home was perfectly chilled and incredibly still. I woke up at my usual time completely rested. There was no anxiety. There was no racing heart. When you remove emotion from a betrayal, the resulting clarity is deeply peaceful. I walked into my immaculate kitchen and began my morning routine. I ground fresh dark roast coffee beans. I listened to the rhythmic drip of the coffee maker filling the glass carafe. I poured myself a large cup, inhaling the rich, bitter aroma. I took my coffee and walked into the front living room. I did not turn on the television. I did not play any music. I simply sat down in my plush armchair facing the large front window that overlooked my pristine driveway. I placed the security tablet on the side table next to me. The screen was divided into a grid displaying the live, crisp feeds from my newly installed exterior cameras. The front porch was empty. The driveway was clear. The street was quiet. I knew exactly what was happening across town. At that very moment, Valerie and Ashley were rushing around barking orders at hairstylists and makeup artists. Jamal was picking up the rented stretch limousine he leased to pretend he was a successful patriarch. Keisha was complaining about her custom gown while demanding everyone cater to her mood. They were all operating under the shared delusion that they had successfully manipulated the invisible middle child. They were absolutely certain that by 4 o'clock this afternoon, they would be popping champagne in my kitchen, taking selfies on my marble countertops, and cementing their fraudulent social status on my dime. I took another slow sip of my coffee. The bitter liquid warmed my chest. I looked at the digital clock on the corner of the tablet screen. The hours ticked by. I did not move. I did not text them to warn them. I let them put on their expensive clothes. I let them load up their rented vehicles. I let the caterers pack their trucks and drive across the city. I sat inside my fortified sanctuary, completely untouched by their chaos, and I waited for the exact moment their delusion collided with my reality. The digital clock on my tablet flipped to exactly 2:45 in the afternoon. I was sitting in my plush armchair with my legs crossed, resting my bare feet on the cool hardwood floor. My coffee cup was empty, but I did not get up to refill it. I did not want to miss a single second of the high-definition broadcast playing out on my security monitors. My community is incredibly quiet on Saturday afternoons. The streets are wide and lined with mature oak trees. Neighbors hire professional landscaping crews to maintain perfectly manicured lawns. It is an environment built on discretion and hushed wealth. The sheer visual disruption of what was about to happen would be talked about at the homeowner association meetings for the next decade. The first notification chimed on my tablet, alerting me to movement at the main community entrance. I tapped the secondary camera feed linked to the neighborhood gate. A massive bottleneck was already forming. Cars were lining up, blocking the turning lane on the main public road. I could see the security guards stepping out of their booth, holding clipboards and waving their arms. The guest list of 150 teenagers was beginning to arrive. They were driving up to the gate expecting to be waved through to a massive mansion party. Instead, they were hitting a solid brick wall of trained security personnel who had been strictly ordered to deny every single vehicle associated with my address. The traffic jam was immediate and chaotic. Teenagers were stepping out of their cars, taking videos on their phones, looking confused and irritated. But I did not focus on the gate for long. A second chime alerted me to my personal driveway camera. I switched the feed back to my primary exterior monitor. Turning onto my quiet cul-de-sac was a massive, obnoxiously long white stretch limousine. It was the kind of tacky rented vehicle you normally see parked outside a cheap nightclub or a high school prom. It navigated the curve of the street with difficulty, its long chassis completely out of place against the backdrop of luxury suburban architecture. The limousine pulled directly into my driveway, stopping just inches away from my closed garage doors. Right behind the limousine, a large white commercial box truck turned into my driveway. The side of the truck featured a brightly colored logo for a local premium catering company. Behind the catering truck, a dark gray cargo van pulled up, parking parallel to my pristine front lawn. I could see the decals for a mobile disc jockey and lighting service plastered across the back windows. They had actually done it. They had orchestrated an entire festival-level event on my property. They had hired professional vendors, rented luxury transportation, and invited a massive crowd, all funded by their delusion and my stolen security access. The driver of the limousine stepped out and walked around to open the rear passenger door. I leaned forward in my chair, watching the 4K resolution feed with absolute clinical fascination. My older brother Jamal was the first to step out. He was wearing a sharply tailored suit that I knew for a fact was purchased using a credit card in our mother's name. He adjusted his jacket cuffs and looked around my property with a smug, satisfied grin, as if he held the deed in his own pocket. He strutted across the concrete driveway, playing the role of the wealthy patriarch financing his little sister's dream. The sheer, unearned confidence radiating from him was staggering. Next came Ashley. My white sister-in-law stepped out of the limousine wearing a floral designer dress and oversized sunglasses. She immediately went to work performing her favorite role as the benevolent event coordinator for her adopted Black family. She did not even glance at my front door. She immediately started waving her hands at the catering truck pointing toward my manicured front lawn and shouting directions. She was orchestrating the movement of commercial vendors on land I paid for with my own blood, sweat, and corporate tears. Then my father, Jerome, emerged from the vehicle. He moved slowly, favoring his bad knee leaning on a polished walking cane. He looked around the neighborhood, nodding approvingly at the expensive houses surrounding mine. He looked like a man arriving at his own summer estate, ready to host the social event of the season. Finally, the guest of honor made her grand entrance. Keisha stepped out of the limousine, requiring the assistance of both Jamal and Jerome just to clear the doorframe. She was wearing the massive sequined ball gown I had watched them purchase on Instagram Live while I was sitting alone in a parking garage after my graduation. The dress was an explosion of tulle and rhinestones, completely excessive for a backyard birthday party, but perfectly aligned with Valerie's desire to project massive wealth. Keisha held the skirt up carefully, ensuring the fabric did not touch my concrete driveway. She looked around with a bored, entitled expression, completely expecting a red carpet to be rolled out for her arrival. And then came Valerie. My mother stepped out of the limousine, last surveying the scene with the pride of a victorious general. She was wearing a sophisticated wide-brimmed hat and a tailored pantsuit. She looked at my house not as a home belonging to her daughter, but as a conquered territory ready to be plundered. She clapped her hands together, signaling the vendors to begin unloading their equipment. I sat inside my perfectly silent, perfectly chilled house, watching the invasion unfold in real time. The audio feed from the cameras picked up every single sound. I could hear the heavy thud of the catering truck doors swinging open. I watched a crew of 4 professional servers in crisp white uniforms begin hauling massive metal chafing dishes, folding tables, and heavy coolers full of ice onto my driveway. They looked hot and confused, sweating in the humid Georgia afternoon sun as they waited for someone to unlock the house so they could set up the food stations. The disc jockey opened the back of his cargo van and began rolling out massive black subwoofers and lighting rigs. The heavy rubber wheels of his equipment carts clattered loudly against my pavement. In a community with a strict homeowner association noise ordinance, bringing festival-grade subwoofers into a residential driveway was a direct violation that carried immediate fines. Valerie did not care about fines. Valerie assumed the invisible middle child would simply pay the penalties on Monday morning. The sheer logistical scale of their audacity was breathtaking. They were unloading dozens of folding chairs, boxes of expensive floral centerpieces, and massive bags of ice. They were transforming my property into a commercial venue right before my eyes. They moved with absolute impunity. There was no hesitation in their steps. There was no whispered concern about whether I might be home. They had checked my schedule, they had intercepted my security portal, and they believed they possessed total ownership of my space. I watched Ashley walk up to the lead caterer. The microphone above my garage captured her voice perfectly. She introduced herself as the event coordinator and told the catering team to bring the hot food directly into the main kitchen. She instructed them to set up the carving station on my marble island and to place the beverage bars on my back patio. She spoke with the casual authority of a woman who had never paid a mortgage payment in her entire life. Valerie nodded in agreement, pointing toward my front door. She told the vendors to just stack the equipment on the porch for a moment while she went inside to turn off the alarm system and open the house up for the party. I placed my empty coffee cup on the side table. My heart was beating with a slow, steady rhythm. I did not feel a drop of panic. I did not feel the familiar childhood urge to shrink away or avoid the conflict. I felt the cold, hard power of a woman who had spent the last 48 hours fortifying her castle. I watched my mother adjust her designer hat and walk confidently up my front walkway. Her heels clicked sharply against the stamped concrete. She climbed the 3 brick steps to my wide front porch, followed closely by Jamal, who was carrying a box of party decorations. Ashley trailed behind them, still barking orders over her shoulder at the confused DJ. Valerie stepped up to my custom heavy oak front door. She did not bother to ring the doorbell. She did not bother to knock. She simply reached into her expensive leather handbag and pulled out her heavy ring of keys. She sifted through the metal keys until she found the shiny silver spare key I had given her 3 years ago. The key she believed gave her unconditional access to my sanctuary. I sat in my armchair watching the high-definition monitor. I watched her raise her hand. I watched her slide that silver key directly into the center of my brand-new drill-resistant smart lock. And I waited for the exact moment her fabricated reality crashed headfirst into my impenetrable boundary. Valerie slid the shiny silver spare key directly into the cylinder of my custom front door. Through the high-definition audio feed on my tablet, I heard the distinct metallic click of the key engaging the pins. I watched her perfectly manicured hand grasp the heavy brass handle. She turned her wrist, expecting the deadbolt to glide open with the smooth submission she demanded from everyone in her life. The lock did not yield. It remained entirely, absolutely rigid. I watched Valerie pause. The confident, victorious posture she had carried up my front steps faltered for a fraction of a second. She pulled the key out, stared at it as if the metal itself had offended her, wiped it quickly against her tailored pantsuit, and shoved it aggressively back into the cylinder. She gripped the handle with both hands this time, putting her body weight into the motion. She twisted hard. The heavy oak door did not budge a single millimeter. The confusion on her face began to rapidly curdle into panic. She jiggled the handle frantically. The sharp rattling sound echoed through the microphone. Jamal, who was standing right behind her holding a massive box of party decorations, shifted his weight impatiently. He set the box down on my pristine welcome mat and stepped forward, nudging our mother aside. He puffed out his chest inside his leased suit, eager to play the role of the capable patriarch. He snatched the key from the lock, examined it, and shoved it back in. He twisted it with sudden aggressive force. When the lock refused to turn, his fragile ego immediately took a hit. He grabbed the door handle and yanked it violently backward and forward, rattling the heavy oak frame against the weather stripping. The door stood perfectly silent and unyielding. A $500 high-security drill-resistant smart deadbolt does not care about Jamal's wounded masculinity. Down on the driveway, the commercial catering crew was sweating in the brutal Georgia heat. 4 professionals in crisp white uniforms stood holding massive aluminum trays of hot food, shifting uncomfortably as they watched my mother and brother wrestle with a front door that clearly did not want to open. The disc jockey was standing by his open cargo van holding a tangled bundle of thick black extension cords, looking completely lost. Valerie stepped back from the door. She balled her hand into a fist and began pounding the side of her hand against the heavy wood. The deep thudding noise vibrated through my security speakers. She hit the door again and again. "Jasmine," she shouted, her voice hitting that shrill, demanding frequency I had feared my entire childhood. "Jasmine, if you are in there, open this door right now. The caterers are waiting in the heat. Stop playing games and open the door." She assumed I was inside. Or rather, she hoped I was inside and had simply forgotten to leave the deadbolt unlocked for her convenience before my supposed flight to Chicago. She pounded her fist against the wood a third time, demanding that reality bend to accommodate her schedule. She reached over and began aggressively jabbing her thumb into my doorbell button. The doorbell was digitally disabled. It made absolutely no sound. I sat in my plush armchair 20 feet away from the front door, taking a slow, calculated sip of my dark roast coffee. I did not flinch at the sound of her pounding. I did not feel a single spike of adrenaline. I watched her strike the door with the clinical fascination of a scientist observing a rat failing to navigate a maze. This is the moment Ashley decided to take center stage. Ashley cannot process the concept of being denied access. To a white woman who actively weaponizes her proximity to a black family, a locked door is not a boundary. It is simply a customer service error that needs to be escalated to a manager. She adjusted her oversized designer sunglasses and marched back down the brick steps, strutting toward the catering crew with breathtaking, unearned audacity. She clapped her hands together sharply, treating the professional catering staff like indentured servants. "Listen up, everyone." Ashley projected her voice dripping with artificial authority. "We are experiencing a minor logistical glitch with the smart home system. The homeowner is currently thousands of miles away and the digital lock is malfunctioning. We are not going to let technology ruin Keisha's special day. The caterers looked at her with blank, exhausted expressions. The lead caterer, a seasoned professional who clearly recognized a disaster in progress, asked where they were supposed to place the hot chafing dishes if the kitchen was inaccessible. Ashley did not even hesitate. She pointed a manicured finger directly at the center of my meticulously maintained front lawn. Just bypass the kitchen entirely, she commanded, waving her hands in broad, sweeping gestures. Bring the tables and the carving stations right over here. Set the buffet line up directly on the grass. It will be a lovely garden party aesthetic anyway. I stared at the monitor, my jaw tightening. My front lawn is an expensive, highly engineered landscape. I pay a premium horticultural service a significant amount of money every month to maintain that pristine emerald green grass. And Ashley, acting as the supreme commander of a property she did not own, was ordering commercial vendors to drag heavy metal tables, industrial heating equipment, and massive ice coolers directly onto my turf. The DJ stepped forward holding his heavy equipment cables. "Miss," he said, pointing to his massive black subwoofers, "I need dedicated power for the soundboard and the lighting rigs. If we are not going inside, where am I supposed to plug all of this in?" Ashley let out a loud theatrical sigh, as if the DJ was being deliberately difficult. "Just run your cables through the flower beds and plug them into the exterior garden outlets," she ordered, pointing toward my custom landscaping lighting. "We have 150 guests arriving at any minute. I need music playing immediately. Let us move, people." The absolute chaotic spectacle of it all was a masterpiece of their own making. Ashley was literally trying to build a makeshift banquet hall on my front lawn, while Valerie continued to violently pound her fists against my front door. Jamal was now kicking the base of the doorframe, his brand-new dress shoes scuffing the bottom plate. Down by the stretch limousine, the guest of honor was having a complete psychological meltdown. Keisha was standing on the hot concrete driveway, drowning in her massive sequined ball gown. The humidity was already ruining her perfectly styled hair. She was stomping her feet and whining loudly to Jerome, complaining that she was sweating and that this entire disaster was ruining her aesthetic. She demanded to know why they could not just go inside where the air conditioning was running. Jerome, leaning heavily on his polished walking cane, looked helplessly at the locked house, offering weak, placating promises to his miracle baby that the door would open any second. The early guests were starting to notice the breakdown. Teenagers dressed in formal wear had abandoned their cars in the traffic jam at the neighborhood gate and walked the rest of the way to my property. They were standing on the public sidewalk at the edge of my property line, pulling out their smartphones. They were hitting record. They were whispering to each other, pointing their phone cameras directly at my mother, who was screaming at a wooden door, and my sister-in-law, who was aggressively directing a confused catering crew across a suburban lawn. My family was providing free high-definition entertainment for 100 high school students. They were actively dismantling their own carefully constructed social facade in real time. They still thought this was just a technical error. They genuinely believed I was sitting in a conference center in Chicago, completely oblivious to the fact that they were currently trespassing on my property. They had no idea I was sitting in the air-conditioned sanctuary of my living room, watching their entitlement crash headfirst into my impenetrable boundary. I took another slow sip of coffee. The real show was just about to begin. The crowd of teenagers on the public sidewalk was multiplying by the minute. What started as a handful of early arrivals had swelled into a mob of over 50 high school students dressed in formal wear. They were clustered at the edge of my manicured grass, holding their smartphones high in the air. The flash units from their cameras pulsed rapidly against the fading afternoon light. They were broadcasting this entire spectacular failure to their social media networks in real time. Down on the driveway, Keisha was having a full-blown psychological collapse. The miracle baby had finally encountered a problem her parents could not buy her way out of. She was screaming at Jerome, demanding to know why she was standing on hot concrete instead of making a grand entrance down a sweeping staircase. She stomped her feet, getting her expensive sequined gown caught under the heel of her shoe, causing a massive tear in the tulle fabric. She wailed loudly, clutching the torn fabric and blaming Jamal for ruining her life. Valerie was pacing this porch like a trapped animal. The sheer public humiliation of the situation was actively breaking her brain. For 35 years, she had maintained an iron grip on her social image. She needed her church friends, her neighbors, and her extended family to believe she was a wealthy, powerful matriarch holding court over a flawless family. Now she was locked out of a house she did not own, while 100 teenagers filmed her sweating and screaming on a porch. Her social currency was evaporating right before her eyes. Ashley could not handle the loss of control. Ashley operates in a reality where the universe is supposed to bend entirely to her will. When she snapped her fingers, she expected the caterers to set up a 5-star buffet on a residential lawn without question. But the catering manager, a seasoned professional who wanted no part of a trespassing dispute, had firmly instructed his crew to stop unloading. He demanded to see a signed contract and a property permit. When Ashley realized her unearned authority was failing, she did what women like her always do when they feel their privilege slipping. She escalated the situation to the highest authority she felt entitled to command. I sat in my living room and turned up the volume on my security tablet. I watched Ashley march away from the catering crew, pulling her smartphone from her designer handbag. She held the phone to her ear, pacing the length of my driveway. Her posture shifted instantly. The arrogant, demanding event coordinator vanished. She immediately adopted the frantic, trembling persona of a terrified victim in distress. She had dialed 911. The high-fidelity audio from my exterior cameras captured every single word of her conversation with the emergency dispatcher. I listened with absolute clinical fascination as my sister-in-law spun a complete fabrication out of thin air. "Yes, hello. I need police assistance immediately," Ashley said, her voice shaking with manufactured panic. "I am at a private residential event venue we rented for a family celebration. We paid in full, and we have hundreds of guests arriving, but we have been locked out." She paused, listening to the dispatcher. Then she doubled down on the lie. "There is someone inside the property," she continued, her voice rising in theatrical distress. "We believe it is a disgruntled contractor or a squatter who has maliciously changed the digital locks and hijacked the building. They are holding our belongings hostage and refusing to let our vendors inside. We have an elderly man and a minor out here, and we feel incredibly unsafe. Please send officers immediately." Valerie, hearing the phone call, rushed over to Ashley. Instead of stopping her daughter-in-law from filing a completely false police report, Valerie decided to actively participate in the crime. She leaned toward the phone, shouting into the receiver, "Tell them this is my daughter's house. Tell them we are family and this squatter is ruining our property. Tell them to bring backup." I stared at the tablet screen, feeling a profound, dangerous shift in the atmosphere. The temperature in my living room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Calling the police to a black household is not a game. It is not a customer service hotline you use to resolve a scheduling conflict. In our community, weaponizing law enforcement is a potentially lethal escalation. Ashley, a white woman, knew exactly the kind of danger she was invoking. She knew the historical and present-day risks of sending armed officers to a black neighborhood for a reported home invasion. She did not care that her husband Jamal, a black man, was standing right there on the lawn. She did not care about the safety of my father Jerome. She certainly did not care about my safety sitting inside the house. She wanted access to my property, and she was perfectly willing to risk my life and my freedom to force the door open. Valerie, my own flesh and blood, heard this woman lie to a police dispatcher and actively corroborated the story. They were willing to have me dragged out of my own home in handcuffs just to save face in front of a crowd of teenagers. The last remaining invisible thread tying me to these people disintegrated completely. There was no going back from this. This was not a family dispute over a catering bill. This was a direct, malicious threat to my physical safety and my legal standing. I did not panic. I am a corporate tax accountant. My entire profession is based on meticulous documentation, regulatory compliance, and maintaining absolute composure during hostile audits. You do not panic when the authorities arrive. You simply present the paperwork that proves you own the building. Less than 5 minutes later, the distant wail of sirens cut through the heavy Georgia humidity. The sound grew rapidly louder, bouncing off the manicured houses in my gated community. The crowd of teenagers on the sidewalk suddenly fell silent. The catering crew immediately stopped what they were doing and stepped away from their equipment, holding their hands clearly visible. Two Atlanta Police Department cruisers turned sharply onto my quiet cul-de-sac. They pulled up directly behind the massive stretch limousine, completely blocking the driveway. The flashing red and blue lights painted the brick facade of my house, sweeping across the lawn in chaotic strobes. I watched the monitors as two uniformed officers stepped out of their vehicles. They moved cautiously, resting their hands near their duty belts, assessing the bizarre scene unfolding on my property. They saw a luxury limousine, a commercial catering truck, a screaming teenager in a ball gown, and a crowd of bystanders filming the entire encounter. Ashley did not hesitate. She marched straight down the driveway to intercept the officers before they could even close their car doors. She was waving her arms, pointing frantically at my front door, and talking at 1,000,000 miles an hour. I could hear her demanding that they kick the door down and arrest the squatter who was holding their expensive venue hostage. She thrust her phone into the officer's face, claiming she had digital invitations proving they had the right to be there. Valerie was right behind her, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue, playing the role of the terrified, helpless matriarch whose family event had been violently hijacked. Jamal stood off to the side, trying to look intimidating, but mostly looking incredibly nervous, as the police officers began asking pointed questions about who actually owned the property. I took one final sip of my coffee. I set the ceramic mug down on the end table. I stood up from my plush armchair and smoothed the wrinkles out of my tailored silk loungewear. I walked over to my home office desk and picked up the thick manila folder I had prepared 2 days ago. I opened the flap and verified the contents one last time. My state-issued driver license verifying my identity. The original stamped warranty deed verifying my absolute ownership of the property. The recent property tax records verifying my financial standing. The printed access logs from the Homeowner Association portal verifying the unauthorized breach attempt. And finally, the freshly stamped restraining orders I had expedited through a judge, outlining a credible threat to my safety from the 4 individuals currently standing on my driveway. Every single document was perfectly organized, legally binding, and impossible to refute. I closed the folder and tucked it securely under my arm. I walked out of my office and moved down the wide hallway toward the front door. The blue and red police lights were flashing through the frosted glass panels, casting long, dancing shadows across my hardwood floor. I could hear Ashley outside speaking in a loud, authoritative tone, instructing the police officers on how to do their jobs. I could hear my mother sobbing for the benefit of the cameras on the sidewalk. They thought they had won. They thought the arrival of law enforcement would intimidate the invisible middle child into quiet submission. They believed that public pressure and police presence would force me to unlock the door, hand over my sanctuary, and apologize for the inconvenience. I reached out and grasped the heavy brass handle of my custom front door. I unlocked the high-security smart deadbolt from the inside. I took a deep breath of the cool air-conditioned air, filling my lungs with absolute certainty. I turned the handle and pushed the heavy oak door wide open, stepping directly out into the flashing lights. The heavy oak door swung inward smoothly. I stepped onto the wide concrete porch and the entire scene froze. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated my face. The collective gasp from the crowd of teenagers on the sidewalk was audible over the low hum of the idling police cruisers. I did not raise my hands in surrender. I did not shout a defensive explanation. I walked down the 3 brick steps with the slow, measured pace of a woman who owned the ground she walked on. The lead officer placed a hand on his radio, tracking my approach. He assessed my tailored silk loungewear, my calm demeanor, and the thick manila folder tucked securely under my arm. Valerie and Ashley immediately started screaming, pointing at me, and demanding the officers take me into custody. I ignored them completely. I walked straight up to the lead officer and stopped exactly 2 feet away, maintaining respectful but absolute eye contact. "Officer, I am the sole legal owner of this property," I said, my voice projecting clearly over the chaotic noise of my mother and sister-in-law. "I understand these individuals have called dispatch claiming a squatter has taken over their event venue. They are lying. They are committing fraud. I am handing you the legal documentation that proves every word they have spoken tonight is a fabrication." I opened the folder. I handed him my Georgia state driver license first. He inspected the address. Then I handed him the original stamped warranty deed, bearing my name and my signature. Next, I passed over the printed Homeowner Association access logs, highlighting the precise timestamp where Ashley attempted to fraudulently breach the security portal using my address. Finally, I handed him the freshly signed restraining orders, documenting a credible threat to my safety. The officer took a small flashlight from his belt. He shined the bright beam directly onto the paperwork, carefully reviewing the embossed seals and the legal signatures. The secondary officer stepped forward, flanking his partner and observing the undeniable proof of my ownership. Calling the police to a black household is not a game. It is a potentially lethal escalation. Ashley knew exactly what she was doing when she dialed 911. She expected her white distress to automatically criminalize my black existence. She expected the uniform to bypass logic and default to force. She could not tolerate the silence that followed as the officers actually read my documents instead of blindly obeying her demands. She marched right up to the officers, her floral designer dress swishing aggressively. "Excuse me," Ashley barked, slapping her manicured hand against her hip. "You do not need to look at whatever fake papers she printed off the internet. We paid for catering. We paid for a disc jockey. We have 100 high school students standing on the sidewalk waiting for a sweet 18. She is ruining a minor child milestone birthday. I demand that you arrest her right now and let us inside our venue." The lead officer lowered his flashlight. He looked Ashley dead in the eyes with an expression of absolute profound exhaustion. "Ma'am," the officer stated, his voice devoid of any warmth. "This woman has just handed me the verified state deed to this property, matching her government-issued identification. If you do not step back immediately, I will place you in handcuffs for aiding and abetting a criminal trespass." Ashley physically recoiled as if she had been struck. Her jaw dropped open. The unearned authority evaporated from her posture, leaving behind a panicked hollow shell. She looked at Jamal, expecting him to intervene, but my brother was backing away slowly, completely terrified of catching a trespassing charge. Valerie realized her general had just been defeated. My mother shoved past Ashley, desperate to reclaim the narrative. "Officer, you do not understand," Valerie cried, clutching her chest and attempting to summon a fresh wave of tears. "This is my daughter. She is my flesh and blood. This house belongs to my family. That means it is family property. I am her mother, so I have every right to host a gathering on my own family land." The sheer delusion required to look an armed police officer in the face and claim that sharing DNA overrides state property laws was breathtaking. The secondary officer shook his head. "Lady, that is not how real estate works," he said bluntly. "You do not own this house. Your name is not on the deed. You do not have a lease agreement. You are currently trespassing on private property." The lead officer handed my documents back to me. He turned to Valerie and delivered the crushing blow. "I am giving you and your entire party exactly 5 minutes to get off this property. If you are not off this driveway in 5 minutes, I am arresting every single one of you for criminal trespass. Furthermore, we have your phone number on file from the emergency dispatch. Calling 911 to report a fake home invasion is a felony. If I have to come back here tonight, you are going to jail for filing a false police report." The commercial vendors did not need to be told twice. The catering manager immediately started shouting orders to his crew. They began throwing chafing dishes and folding tables back into the box truck with frantic speed. The disc jockey did not even bother wrapping his cables neatly. He tossed his heavy black subwoofers into the back of his van, slamming the cargo doors shut. They wanted absolutely nothing to do with a police barricade and a potential fraud investigation. The reality of the situation finally hit the miracle baby. Keisha had been standing near the stretch limousine, waiting for the adults to magically fix her problem. When she heard the officer threaten our mother with jail time, her fragile, pampered world completely shattered. Keisha let out an ear-piercing shriek. She threw her hands in the air and stomped her expensive high heels against the concrete driveway. "My party!" she screamed, her voice cracking hysterically. "You ruined my party! My friends are all watching! I look like a total loser!" She grabbed the sides of her massive sequined ball gown and yanked the fabric in pure frustration. The delicate tulle ripped violently, separating from the bodice in a jagged, uneven line. She kicked the side of the rented limousine, leaving a dark scuff mark on the white paint. The high school students on the sidewalk were capturing every single second of her meltdown on their phones, laughing and whispering as the golden child humiliated herself on a monumental scale. Jerome tried to calm her down, reaching out to pat her shoulder, but she slapped his hand away, wailing that her life was entirely destroyed. Valerie looked at me, her face completely drained of color. The realization that I held absolute power over her freedom and her reputation finally sank in. She looked terrified, small, and completely powerless. "Jasmine, please," Valerie whispered, her voice trembling without any fake theatrics. "Please do not do this to us. Do not embarrass us like this in front of everybody." I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to shout to be heard over Keisha's tantrum and the idling police cruisers. I spoke with the cold, calculated precision of a woman who had just audited 35 years of emotional debt and permanently closed the account. "You embarrassed yourselves," I said, my voice carrying across the driveway. "You tried to break into my home. You tried to use my money to fund your illusion. You lied to the police, hoping they would drag me out of my own sanctuary. You did all of this because you truly believed I would just roll over and take the disrespect." Valerie opened her mouth to argue, but the words died in her throat. I looked at Jamal, who was actively avoiding my gaze. I looked at Ashley, who was hiding behind her husband. I looked at Jerome, who was struggling to manage a screaming teenager. Finally, I looked my mother dead in the eye. 3 days ago, I walked across a university stage and earned my master's degree," I said, holding her gaze captive. I looked out into the audience and saw 5 empty seats. "You chose a dress fitting over my graduation. I chose my peace over your party. Get off my property." I turned my back on them and walked straight up the brick steps. I walked through my front door and locked the heavy smart deadbolt behind me. I did not look through the peephole to watch them leave. I walked straight into my kitchen, picked up my security tablet, and watched the rest of the eviction play out in glorious high definition. The police officers stood with their arms crossed, ensuring my family got back into their rented stretch limousine. Jamal practically sprinted to the vehicle, terrified of catching a criminal charge that would permanently ruin his fragile business profile. Ashley scrambled in right behind him, her floral designer dress catching on the doorframe. Valerie had to physically pull Keisha, who was still sobbing hysterically over her ruined gown and shattered social standing, into the back seat. The caterers and the disc jockey were already gone, having fled the moment the police threatened arrests. The limousine slowly backed out of my driveway, followed by the 2 police cruisers escorting them out of the neighborhood. But the real humiliation was waiting for them at the main entrance. The security guardhouse was completely swamped. 150 high school students, along with their frustrated parents who had dropped them off, were clogging the main road. Traffic was backed up for half a mile. When the stretch limousine pulled up to the exit, the crowd swarmed it, expecting the party to be relocated or at least explained. I watched through the gate camera feed as Valerie was forced to roll down the tinted window and face the music. She had to look those wealthy suburban parents and judgmental teenagers in the eye and admit there was no party. She had no venue, no food, and no music. Keisha was screaming from the back seat, burying her face in her hands as her peers recorded the entire humiliating retreat on their smartphones. Within an hour, the disaster regarding Keisha and her fake Sweet 18 was trending across local high schools. The flawless family facade Valerie had spent decades cultivating was publicly and permanently dismantled in front of the exact people she was trying to impress. By Sunday morning, the damage control operation commenced. Ashley, operating on her usual playbook of weaponized victimhood, took to social media. She posted a 10-minute video on her page, sitting in the front seat of her car without makeup, looking distressed and fragile. She spun a masterclass in manipulation. She cried to her followers about a massive familial misunderstanding. She claimed that we had a verbal agreement for the venue and that I had suddenly and maliciously changed my mind to ruin a young black girl milestone birthday due to my own unhealed corporate trauma. She used words like toxic individualism and aggressive behavior, leaning heavily into every stereotype she could subtly invoke to make me look like an unhinged, bitter villain. The video started gaining traction. Extended family members and women from my mother's church began leaving supportive comments, offering prayers for my hardened heart and praising Ashley for her grace. They forgot that I am an auditor. I deal in hard evidence and irrefutable documentation. I did not record a response video. I did not type out a defensive explanation pleading my case to strangers on the internet. I simply downloaded the raw, unedited 4K resolution video and audio files from my security system. I compiled the footage with clinical precision. The video began with the crystal-clear audio of Ashley lying to the 911 dispatcher claiming a squatter was holding their venue hostage. It transitioned directly to the footage of her standing on my lawn, ordering a catering crew to trespass and run heavy electrical cables through my flower beds. The grand finale was the footage of Valerie aggressively banging on my front door, actively admitting to the police officers that her name was not on the deed, but demanding they break into my house anyway because she was my mother. I uploaded the compilation file tagged Ashley, tagged my mother, and shared it directly to the extended family group page and the community church digital bulletin board. I added a single sentence to the caption. The ledger is now public. The digital backlash was instantaneous and absolute. The community response shifted from sympathetic support to sheer, unadulterated horror. Pastor Davis and the church elders who pride themselves on respectability and strict order were appalled by the footage of my mother attempting to coordinate a home invasion and lying to law enforcement. Valerie was quietly asked to step down from the church hospitality committee. Her phone calls to her prayer circle went completely unanswered. Ashley deleted her crying video within 20 minutes, but the internet is forever. Her performative allyship was exposed as opportunistic entitlement. They were completely iced out of their social circles, excommunicated by the very people they had tried to impress with my money. Social ruin is deeply painful, but financial ruin is fatal. For years, my silent financial padding had been the only structural support keeping their house of cards standing. When I cut the cord, the collapse was rapid and total. Without my emergency transfers to cover his predatory interest rates, Jamal's luxury car rental business folded in less than 60 days. He could not afford the commercial insurance premiums or the lease payments. The leasing companies repossessed the high-end vehicles right out of his driveway in the middle of the night. Ashley suddenly found herself married to an unemployed man drowning in commercial debt, effectively ending her smug superiority. The reality of building wealth without my free labor hit them like a freight train. Valerie and Jerome faced an identical economic reckoning. Without the invisible middle child subsidizing their lifestyle, paying for unexpected home repairs, or floating them cash for extravagant church donations, they could no longer maintain their standard of living. The cost of leasing their lifestyle finally caught up with their actual income. They were forced to put their house on the market and downsize. They moved into a much smaller, outdated townhouse on the outskirts of the city, far away from the prestigious zip codes they loved to brag about. Keisha, the miracle baby, was forced to get a part-time job at a retail clothing store to pay for her own gas and cell phone bill. It was a harsh reality check she was entirely unprepared to handle. I watched their financial empire crumble from a distance, feeling nothing but the profound peace of a balanced ledger. I did not reach out to gloat. I did not answer the desperate emails Jamal sent begging for a temporary bridge loan to save his business. I maintained absolute impenetrable silence. The Bank of Jasmine was closed, the accounts were liquidated, and the bad debt was finally written off forever. Society loves to tell women, especially successful Black women, that we are supposed to be the ultimate nurturers. We are conditioned to believe that if we cut off our toxic parents or refuse to fund our struggling siblings, we will be consumed by a crushing, inescapable guilt. People assume that sitting in a massive house all alone after excommunicating your entire bloodline must be a lonely, miserable existence. I am here to tell you that is a complete and absolute lie. I did not feel a single microscopic ounce of guilt. I did not lose a single minute of sleep wondering if I had been too harsh. In fact, my sleep cycle regulated perfectly. The chronic tension in my shoulders that I had carried since childhood completely evaporated. My stress breakouts cleared up. When you remove the source of a chronic infection, the body heals with remarkable speed. The silence in my four-bedroom home was not lonely. It was the rich, resonant sound of absolute peace. I had reclaimed my time, my energy, and my financial portfolio. With the emotional dead weight permanently severed, I channeled 100% of my focus into the very achievement my family had tried to ignore. I took my newly minted Master of Science in Taxation and walked directly into the managing partner's office at my firm. I did not ask for a performance review. I demanded a structural realignment of my compensation package. I laid out my audit history, my client retention rates, and the multi-million-dollar corporate mergers I had successfully navigated over the past 4 years. I showed them exactly how much revenue my specific expertise had generated for the firm. When you know your exact market value, negotiations are swift and ruthless. The partners did not even try to lowball me. By the end of that meeting, I was officially promoted to Director of Corporate Taxation. The promotion came with a massive base salary increase, an aggressive performance bonus structure, and most importantly, equity in the firm. I had officially moved from being a high-earning employee to being an owner. The master degree, my family deemed less important than a teenager's dress fitting, was the exact key that unlocked permanent, unshakable financial independence. I was building actual generational wealth for myself. You cannot achieve a milestone of that magnitude and let it pass unacknowledged. But this time, I was in complete control of the guest list. I did not rent a tacky stretch limousine or invite 100 strangers to validate my existence. I booked the private wine room at a high-end steakhouse in Buckhead. I curated a guest list of exactly 12 people. These were not people who shared my genetic code. They were my chosen family. They were the brilliant, driven women who had dropped off hot meals on my porch during my grueling midterm weeks. They were the corporate mentors who had sponsored my promotion behind closed doors. They were the friends who understood the brutal, exhausting reality of the 50-hour hustle. When I walked into that private dining room, they all stood up and clapped. They brought thoughtful gifts, handwritten cards, and genuine, unadulterated joy for my success. We spent the evening eating premium cuts of steak, drinking vintage wine, and laughing until our ribs ached. Nobody asked me for a bridge loan. Nobody made passive-aggressive comments about my independence. Nobody tried to diminish my promotion to make themselves feel taller. It was a perfectly balanced exchange of mutual respect and celebration. I looked around that table and realized that family is an action verb. Family is not a birthright you are forced to endure. Family is the active, consistent choice to show up for the people you value. My chosen family showed up for me without hesitation. That night, as I drove myself back to my heavily secured home, I spent a lot of time reflecting on the concept of black girl magic. It is a phrase that gets thrown around constantly in our culture. We use it on social media to celebrate our degrees, our businesses, and our resilience. But I have realized that society has deeply weaponized that phrase against us. People use the concept of black girl magic to romanticize our suffering. They expect us to perform miracles with absolutely zero resources. They expect us to turn deep developmental trauma into a triumphant success story. They expect us to be the strong black woman who absorbs every ounce of damage from her community, her workplace, and her family, and still manages to smile gracefully while carrying the entire world on her back. They want us to be magical so they do not have to be accountable. I reject that definition entirely. True black girl magic is not just about overcoming impossible obstacles to succeed. It is not about enduring abuse and packaging it into a digestible story of resilience. True magic is the absolute power of setting an impenetrable boundary. It is the magic of looking a toxic blood relative directly in the eye and saying no without a single stutter or justification. It is the alchemy of turning your absence into your loudest and most powerful statement. It is the wizardry of auditing a relationship, recognizing the massive emotional deficit, and having the profound self-respect to permanently close the account. I did not perform magic by surviving my family's financial and emotional exploitation. I performed magic by walking away from it. I took my power back the moment I realized I was the prize. They needed my capital to fund their delusions, but I never needed their approval to build my empire. They thought ghosting my graduation would break me into submission. Instead, it simply provided the perfect silent backdrop for me to walk off their stage and build my own arena. Today, my house remains perfectly quiet. The locks are secure. The cameras are rolling. The Bank of Jasmine is permanently closed to anyone who does not respect the currency of my peace. I am thriving in a reality they can only view through the distant cold lens of the internet. They played a stupid game, and they won the ultimate prize of my permanent absence. The most profound lesson from Jasmine's journey is that true empowerment comes from setting impenetrable boundaries. We are often conditioned to believe that family loyalty means enduring endless exploitation and disrespect. However, surviving abuse is not a badge of honor, and true magic lies in walking away from toxic environments. Your worth is not determined by the approval of people who view you merely as a financial resource. You have the right to close the ledger on relationships that consistently drain you. Real family is an active choice built on mutual respect, not an inescapable obligation bound by shared genetics. Drop your own story of setting boundaries in the comments below and make sure to hit that like and subscribe button for more empowering content.